So, Councillor Rogerson, the live stream is working now for you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before consideration of today's business, I will outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and is also being recorded. Though I have to say on my screen, yes, I can just see it clicking over now. May I remind members and officers to introduce yourselves each time you speak and turn your video and microphone off when you have finished speaking. If the Council's live stream fails during the meeting and we cannot share the proceedings, I will adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored. If the issue cannot be resolved, I will halt the meeting and the remaining business will be concluded at a future date. If a member experiences a technical issue, I will adjourn for a short period to try to re-establish their connection. Members wishing to speak or ask a question should indicate by typing X in the chat box, and for a few of you I know that will be via a hands up because you don't have that facility. As I call members to speak, I will remind you to switch on your microphone. If for some reason you cannot be heard, the Democratic and Governance Officer will advise you. Votes will be taken using a roll call procedure. The Democratic and Governance Officer will read out the recommendation and the name of the proposer and seconder, and will then call each committee member's name in turn. You should confirm your name and advise whether you vote in favour or against the recommendation, or whether you wish to abstain from the vote. The Democratic and Governance Officer will then count the votes and advise the result accordingly. Where a member has declared a non-registrable interest, a disclosable pecuniary interest, or an interest by virtue of any trade union membership in a matter, they must leave the virtual meeting. Their departure will be confirmed and they will be invited to rejoin the meeting at the appropriate time. I plan to have a 10-minute break after the budget item at around 11:20. And before we start today's business, I will ask Debbie, the Democratic Governance Officer, to confirm committee members, co-opted members, participating observers and officers' attendance. Thank you. Over to you, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will now call each of the committee members. If you could confirm your name and your electoral division or the organisation that you're presenting. Thank you. Councillor Atherfold.
Good morning, Councillor Atherfold, Camborne, Treslotham.
Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Neil Burden, Stoke Clemsland Division.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Simon Elliott, Ludgman Division.
Thank you. Councillor Formosa.
Hello, Mark Foremost, Duty Trevillas.
Thank you. Councillor Frank.
Sorry, I've just had a message from Sheila Lennox-Boyd, from Councillor Lennox-Boyd. She says, can you give my apologies, please? I'm in an adult social care meeting and I will join as soon as I can after about 10 o'clock.
Lovely, thank you for that.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Frank. Thank you. Councillor Sawnby.
Good morning, Councillor David Sawnby, representing Falmouth Truscabase.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Mike Thomas, representing Helston North.
Thank you. And Katie Fitzsimmons.
Good morning, Katie Fitzsimmons, Diocese of Truro.
Thank you. I can also confirm that Councillor Sally Hawkin is on the meeting today, and she is the Cabinet Member for Children, Wellbeing and Public Health. Good morning, Councillor Hawkin.
Good morning.
I understand that we will also have one of our participating observers attending during the meeting, who's the acting chair of the Cornwall Partnership NHS Hospital Trust, but she will be joining the meeting a little later this morning. I can also confirm that the officers on the meeting call today are Meredith Teasdale, Strategic Director, Together for Families, Kate Evan Hughes, Service Director, Education, Lisa Harvey, Service Director, Children's Health and Wellbeing, Ellie Wilcox, Head of Financial Planning and Insight, Gareth Rees, Strategic Finance Manager for Together for Families, Charlotte Hill, Head of Partnerships, Innovation and Wellbeing, Liz Cahill, Head of Commissioning, Maternity, Children and Young People, NHS Kerno. She will be joining us for agenda item a little later in the meeting, together with Mark Rundle, Commissioning Manager, Maternity, Children and Young People, NHS Kerno. Also on the meeting call today is Joanne Heather, Democratic and Governance Officer, producer for today's meeting, and Richard Orpwood, Democratic Support Officer, who is dealing with the live stream today, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I've been on mute. It is very noisy here. I do apologise. If it becomes unbearable, then I will hand over to Simon. Okay, but I'll try, and we'll see how it goes. I apologise for not putting my roofer off, but having waited 6 months in a queue, I didn't feel able to turn him away today. So apologies. Okay, so item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Will Elliott, one of our co-opted members.
Okay, thank you. And any declarations of interest, please? No, thank you. And item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of December. Page 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I can't see any X's or any hands up, so could I have a proposer for those, please?
Happy to propose.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. And a seconder, please.
Happy to second.
Thank you. That's Gemma, I think. Yes, thank you. And we will now have the roll call to vote on those. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation is that the minutes of the meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 2nd of December 2020 were correctly recorded, and that they be signed by the Chairman. This is being proposed by Councillor Atherfold and seconded by Councillor Massey. I'll now call each member in turn to vote. If you could please indicate your name and advise whether you wish to vote in favour or against the recommendation or wish to abstain. Thank you. Councillor Atherfold.
Councillor Atherfold, 4.
Councillor Burden.
Neil Burden, 4.
Councillor Elliott.
Simon Elliott, 4.
Councillor Formosa.
Mark Formosa, 4.
Councillor Frank.
Hilary Frank, 4.
Councillor Gammon.
Jackie Gammon, 4.
Councillor Harvey.
Adrian Harvey, 4.
Councillor Lennox Boyd sends her apologies. Councillor Kirk.
Arthur Kirk, 4.
Councillor Massey.
Councillor Massey, 4.
Councillor Mustoe.
James Mustoe, 4.
Councillor Rand.
Julian Rand, 4.
Councillor Rogerson.
Pat Rogerson, 4.
Councillor Sawnby.
David Sawnby, 4.
Councillor Mike Thomas.
Mike Thomas, 4.
And Katie Fitzsimmons.
Katie Fitzsimmons, 4.
Thank you, members. Chairman, that recommendation has been agreed unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And item number 4 is public questions.
We've received no public questions, Chairman.
Thank you. In that case, we can move on to pre-decision scrutiny and policy development, which is item 5, the budget. And you will have had that report separately. So I'll pass over. I don't know who, we're not having a long presentation, I understand, but I don't know who wants to introduce it. Is that Ellie or Gareth?
I will. Thank you, Pat.
Okay, thank you. Over to you. Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you. So this report brings forward the Cabinet's latest budget proposals for 2021-22 and the medium-term financial plan for 24-25. It will be presented to all the overview and scrutiny committees during January for their consideration. The draft budget and MTFP presented at Cabinet and the overview and scrutiny committees back in the autumn outlined that the council needed to make savings of around 36 million in 21-22 to deliver a balanced budget. Following review and critical challenge, as well as announcements contained in the spending review and the finance settlement, there is now a balanced budget position for the 21-22 financial year with a very small surplus of around 150,000. The latest medium-term financial plan includes planned savings of around 32 million, which are about 18 million in 21-22. In later years, there is a gap of 26 million, which increases up to 27 million, which will need to be closed through the council's transformation programme. So over the period of this medium-term financial plan, the total savings are around 59 million. This clearly has been an extraordinary year in which to set a balanced budget. COVID-19 has had a profound effect on the council's finances, and while central government has provided financial compensation in the current year, the financial impact of the pandemic is expected to continue long into 21-22. The government has recently announced COVID funding relating to next year, but not all of this has been built into the budget and will be used to support further anticipated COVID costs next year, such as additional costs coming through from adult social care, homelessness, and any costs coming through from within Together for Families. And these at this point have not been built into the budget either. The council's budget for 21-22 has focused on trying to achieve financial sustainability amidst this challenging and uncertain climate. As a result, the following principles have been established that underpin this budget strategy. So we have ensured that, as far as possible, day-to-day spend on services is funded from recurrent income sources and not from one-offs, such as non-recurrent grants or the use of reserves. So essentially, we're not using savings to pay for our day-to-day expenditure. The council holds sufficient reserves to ensure that financial resilience, which is based on the level of financial risk arising from our service activity, is at an absolute minimum at £35 million in the council's general fund reserve. But this level may need to increase as we undertake our risk assessments, particularly arising out of the pandemic going into the next financial year. Growth proposals have been matched with equal level of savings. In the demand-driven services, growth would only be recognised if there was absolute evidence of this growth and there was a plan in place to manage the increasing costs, which is known as an intervention plan. Table 1 in the budget report shows how a balanced budget has been achieved following the budget gap presented in the autumn. To summarise, these are closing the gap is through combination of savings, applying the adult social care precept of 3%, which increases the overall council tax charge to 4.99%, which was allowed following the central government spending review. This will increase council tax income by about 9 million per annum, which will be passported directly to adult social care. Additional savings through the voluntary redundancy process have been identified, and also greater management of third-party spend. We have revised our funding assumptions following the notification of the actual grant levels through from central government, as well as using some one-off grants limited to where we can, and also some technical adjustments to help close the gap, which are for 1 year only, and going forward over the medium-term financial plan, sustainable recurrent savings will need to be found to replace these adjustments. For the second consecutive year, a 1-year spending review and settlement was provided by government. We're hoping that a multi-year settlement will be carried out in 2021. Due to the impact of COVID-19, we have seen reduced levels of income collected for both council tax and business rates compared to our budgeted position. As a result, we are estimating that we will have a deficit on what's called our collection fund, which has to be spread evenly over the next 3 years. We are also projecting that COVID-19 will continue to impact upon our council tax and business rates income for the next financial year and future years, and therefore we have had to adjust our the plan accordingly. So this report is part of the budget scrutiny process, where with your knowledge of services, you have the opportunity to bring forward potential alternative and additional options for the council's budget, whether this be through additional savings or reductions to growth assumptions, but specific within the services that are under the remit of this committee. Appendix 1 to the report is for information and sets out the proposed total budgets by directorate and services over the 4 years. And Appendix 2 to the report provides the full list of proposed savings for 2021-22 for this directorate that have been identified. So that's all I was going to say from my introduction. So I'll pass you over to Meredith at this point. Thank you.
So, I mean, we've already gone through in detail the proposals around Together for Families and the conversation that we had in the last meeting. The only change that has taken place since then is that some work around the drug and alcohol team has taken place, and we will be, along with other directorates, putting 25k forward for the antisocial behaviour officers, and also the Troubled Families grant, which we now have had confirmation of. Lisa is working around how we make sure that the right money goes towards DAT work and making sure that we have that overview. So those are the only changes from last time. There is the conversations that obviously, and Ellie's alluded to this, around making sure that there is the right amount of money in the core budget, and that our key mechanism for doing that as a local authority is through the council tax, and the implications potentially of any percentage changes that are agreed by yourselves as elected members around that, and the potential implications in the longer term for our core funding and our ability to deliver all the services that we currently have. But I know that you will have been discussing that in your groups as well, about the council tax and what is right. So again, happy to field any questions or any further information that you require. I'm just trying to find the paragraph, but Councillor Rogerson did point out a number of acronyms that we have in one of the paragraphs, which, to be fair, I needed to also go and check what they stand for, and that was around our statutory returns. And I'm just trying to find the paragraph now. It will jump out of me at some stage. So within that, I think that there is CIN, there's ASBG, etc. All of those are statutory returns which we have to complete.
It's page 14, Meredith.
Perfect. Page 14, which I now haven't got numbers on my page, so I'm still struggling.
It's 5.16. Or shall I just read them?
That would be great, and I'll then try and remember what.
Right, okay. So it's talking that paragraph about the increase in demand, and three of the things that are given as examples are, and I didn't have a clue about any of these, I have to say, is ASGLB.
Yeah. And I'm just digging out my email now. So ASGLB is the regular foster carer return that we complete. It's not what we call it in the when we're talking about it, but that's the acronyms that the government have used for us.
And then there's CIN census.
That's the Children in Need census, which again is a regular census that we complete for DFE.
And we're being told in that paragraph that there are significant increases in demand, and that the last one was SSDAN03.
Yeah, which is the annual Children in Care return. So within that, you know that we've had a growth in the amount of in our budget within Together for Families, and to a certain extent Ellie's already referred to that we've shown that we have growth. We also have an intervention plan for how we try and manage that growth over the coming year. So that's also been factored into the conversations that we had last year, but we do know that there is growth, and we do recognise that with the lockdown 3, that again that is likely to continue, if not increase, but that those conversations to continue to take place on that monthly and quarterly basis as we analyse our budgets about how we are managing demand ourselves, but also those conversations that we're having with corporate colleagues where necessary.
Thank you for that, Meredith. I can see David's got his hand up. Before I come to David, in our discussions now, I just want to draw your attention, please, to page 20, which I think will help focus our minds. 13.3, where it's asking us to consider this and to focus our discussions around those issues, the appropriateness of pressures, the robustness of the savings, to identify any further savings if we feel it, value for money, the consultation with service users and residents, and implications on the workforce. So I just thought it would be wise to just have those at the forefront of our minds while we discuss. So thank you, Meredith and Ellie. I'll come first to David then, Councillor Atherfold.
Yes, thank you for that. I've got two questions. Firstly, to Meredith, I think it was, you mentioned 25 grand for an antisocial behaviour. Now, is that for a new officer, or is that to be spread amongst existing officers? You're on mute, Meredith.
Meredith, you're muted.
Oh, it was a perfect answer as well. So that's for existing officers. Funding was taken away. My understanding is it was grant funding that was taken away, and so we absolutely think that we need to continue to have those officers. So we have across the council committed to find 25k from our budgets for next year to continue that work.
I mean, it's not a huge amount of money. How many existing officers have we got?
I'll have to go back and find that out. So I know that we're so I think that it's going to 100k. So I think it's 25k from or from 4 of the other directorates, 3 of the other directorates as well. But I can get some more information for you around that, Dave, Councillor Atherfold, that
just
would be
didn't seem a huge amount of money, really.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it's 25k is something that we can easily cope with within our budget.
Okay, thanks. And also, while we're on page 14, 5.15, can you just explain? I'm not quite sure that Cornwall social care is one of the lowest funded in the country and one of the most efficient, brackets, in the bottom 20%.
Yeah, so when you look at benchmarking data, and there's always caveats to be had with benchmarking data about there are some nuances about how each authority calculates it slightly. But when you look at our benchmarking data, we have some of the lowest cost per unit, and actually are one of the most efficient, and partly that is proved by our Ofsted rating. So as you know, there's only 17 other authorities that have an outstanding. So, but also when you look at KPI data, so our number of children in care, etc. Again, you know, all of these those are quantitative comparisons that we can make, which, you know, there's nuances within that in every scenario, because actually for some authorities it is important that they have a larger number of children in care at that point because of things that may have happened in the past. But when you look at the cold hard data, our efficiency is very high and very good, and that's something that this new leadership team looks to maintain. It is a legacy from Trevor and Jack and Jane, but it is something that we look to continue.
So in the bottom 20% is the lowest funded in the country, bottom 20%, not the bottom 20% of the most efficient.
Well, we're in the highest 20%, or in fact of the most efficient. So we're in the wrong quartiles. We're in the best quartiles in both areas.
It's just the way it's laid out. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably I added some words, so it's probably me that caused that. So I apologise.
Okay.
Thank you. We are indeed our own worst enemies, of course, functioning so well with so little funding. Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Thomas. Over to you, Mike.
Oh, thank you. I think Julian was in front of me.
You go, Mike. I'll go next.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your. Sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Julian.
I almost wanted to say asked and answered, because my question was what Councillor Atherfold was discussing regarding the 24k. But I'll just do a supplementary on that. Thank you, Meredith. Could you just say whether that would be dedicated for school work, or would it be for working within communities where there might be young people engaged in antisocial behaviour?
So it's in the round, and I suppose that's what we would want it to be. So we're not specifying that 25k should only be on children and young people, because actually it's the whole family, isn't it? And it's how the ASB workers work in that community in the round. But absolutely, part of the work that we know takes place is around people identifying where there are young people, where there are issues about young people congregating. And actually recently, and it's not to do with the ASB officers, our enforcement officers, who are also the COVID marshals, identified some issues within one of our towns, escalated that absolutely appropriately to us, and we were able to support them and the area with the police in dispersing and putting some dispersal orders in and supporting those young people. So it is about that collective approach that we're taking as a council, and we're really trying to drive to make sure that we're looking at responding to both the community and the family and the young person.
If I could just briefly come back, Chair. I mean, it's good to have this person doing that as an appointment, but do we also have the funds to draw on to actually do anything about the issues that are actually discovered in that community? Because I did raise this in a previous budget issue, meeting rather, to say that could there be funds within the budget to actually assist areas, because it's all very well identifying the issue and pointing out things. It's actually putting in place something that would help young people not get involved in stuff that they shouldn't be doing?
So, you know, we use a whole range of different mechanisms. So part of our contracted services, whether it be Wild Parents, Carefree, which doesn't immediately link to this, we do contract some of our voluntary sector to help support us in these areas. There's also work within the neighbourhoods directorate as well, which is about supporting families, well, communities in themselves to deal with the issue. There is also obviously the drug and alcohol support as well, which we are looking to support funding from with through the Troubled Families Grant as well. So there are different mechanisms. Can we always find, if there was more resource, would that help? Yes, obviously it would, but there's also an element about us making sure that it's coordinated within those local communities, and local communities know what their issues are, and therefore making sure that they can pull down and are aware of the resources that they can use to support the need. So I think that's where I would want us to focus our work, to make sure it was better about how local communities know what they can get pulled down to make sure that they're supporting their young people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And apologies, Julian, that I'd missed you out. Over to you, Councillor Rand.
No problem at all, Pat. But firstly, I just think it's astonishing that we do so well, as you quite rightly said, Pat, on the level of funding that we get. And we do, in a sense, shoot ourselves in the foot. I think in terms of the average funding per child, I think we sit at 144 out of 149. It's right down the bottom. And yes, we're doing well. But the question in my mind always is whether it's sustainable, and we've got to keep our eyes and ears open for any strains in that balance that we've obviously got. The one issue I wanted just to raise in this presentation, there's no specific mention of the early years foundation stage, but everything I'm listening to, reading, and certainly a report that came out from the Early Years Alliance, is that the preschools and nurseries, which have been asked to stay open, are really struggling. Obviously the funding comes from the government, and it's fixed to the child attending the nursery or the preschool, within certain restrictions, of course. But as it stands at the moment, they are struggling, and we're in danger of losing a lot of them. Having been a treasurer, having setting up a preschool and being the treasurer for many years, I do understand the pressures on that sector, and it worries me that all of a sudden, if the young child, for whatever reason, doesn't attend the nursery, the funding stops, yet they're required to stay open. This is a crazy situation, and I'd ask Meredith to comment on her view on that, but also to ask that we put every bit of pressure we can on the government to use common sense in this and make sure that these very precious establishments stay open, because, as I've said before, it's called the early years foundation stage for a very good reason. It is the foundation of our young people's education. Thank you.
So absolutely hear you clearly, Councillor Rand. So it is one of the areas that we are flagging as a risk within our internal processes, particularly in the current lockdown, which is the pressure on our early years provision. I think you'll be aware that through the last lockdown that both Carol Kimberley and Sharon Hindley worked really hard with our early years providers and did regular webinars to both support them with guidance of how they ensure that their provision was safe, but also with financial matters. I think the points that you make around funding We know that there is a funding issue within the early years. We also know that with parents perhaps choosing not to send their children to nursery at the moment, into early years provision at the moment, even though they are open, is creating issues within the sector. But we do have a picture of that and a view of that, and are supporting provision. I'll bring Kate in a second as well, so that she can talk about what has taken place. I do think that there is something about continuing to raise that issue with DFE. We are doing that, but there is, I think, no problem with continuing to do that and raise our concerns. The other element, and again, you'll have seen this through our different scrutiny meetings, is that we have a real focus again on best start in life. So Lisa Harvey is leading on that and has had conversations with you about that, and that's about how we bring together the new children and maternity hospital that's being constructed in RCHT, our health visitors, our early years providers, our support from our children and family social workers as well, around really ensuring that that first 1,000 days are absolutely right, and because we know that that has a huge impact through the rest of life as well. So it is a real focus for us over the next year and going into the following years as well, making sure that we get that coordinated support for our young families and our young children. But I don't know if Kate, you want to add anything, if that's all right, Councillor Rogerson. I think she's on the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Meredith. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you very much, Meredith, for that full answer anyway.
Yes, just to, Kate Hughes, Service Director for Education, and I have the funding in respect of early years. So just to reassure you, we've done 2 webinars already with early years providers to look at the issues that they're raising around funding, just to make sure that we're stepping in where we can to support. We've also raised it in our conversations with the Regional Schools Commissioner that we think that this is putting things in jeopardy. We know that some of our providers are still struggling from the last lockdown, so we need to make sure that we are working with them. So it's just to provide you with that reassurance. And I've got the statement, because I'm just waiting to get the statement of what we've done on funding. What I'll do, if you're happy, Chair, is I'll put it into the chat bar.
Lovely, thank you, Kate. Also, with respect to that, in the next item, we'll see in the papers that both the health service as well have a focus on the mental health of families as a whole for that 1,000 years, as Meredith has just mentioned, and so that may come up in discussions in the next item as well, so thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Elliott and Councillor Gammon. Simon was first. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Thinking back to 5.16 again, it is quite a stark reminder that of the situation where you looked at since we became councillors in this council, that children in care is up by over 25%. Nationally, more children in care have an identified need than do not. Is that the picture in Cornwall? And is the pressure of our low funding on the high needs block exacerbated by the number of children in care with a particular need?
So can I just check, Councillor Elliott, when you say a particular need in the sense of SEND and EHCP is a category of EHCP?
Yeah, so looking at the SIN data, I know over 55%, I think it is, of children nationally in 2019 had either an EHCP or an identified need. I think it was 45% had no need of any description. So in Cornwall, do we have a similar picture? And is the issue of our high needs block funding causing that to be a problem? And can the council, if we carry on getting an increase over the period of the next council, of hopefully not, but of 25% more children in care over the next council, do we have that budget space to cope with that? And if not, you know, where would that money come from if we did need it?
Yeah. Okay, so there's a number of...
Can I just ask that you just clarify for the purposes of the live stream, because I think our directorate is known for its initials, as we proved. just to clarify the education healthcare plans, please, for the live stream. Thank you.
Education healthcare plans are EHCPs, as they are colloquially known, and they offer that wraparound support to children who have an identified special educational need and disability, and they are reviewed on a regular basis and should have clear outcomes as well as the voice of the child within them. I'll let Kate come in as well around this. So we're in line with national figures. We're not an outlier in any way. The issue, what happens if the children in need population continues to increase and the population of children who have education healthcare plans continues to increase, and will that have a knock-on impact on our resources? I mean, I think the simple answer is yes, and that's why we're very much having the conversations about early intervention and prevention and continuing to look at how we extend that. So we know that we have outstanding early help provision, which sits within our children and family services. It's how we continue to join that up with our universal provision, with our emotional health and wellbeing provision, and also with ensuring that we have that best start, that best 1,000-day start, so that we're reducing that demand wherever possible, and looking to make sure that we have short-term interventions if required, so that we haven't got that long-term specialist provision and need. I think the issue around special educational needs and disabilities, we know nationally is an issue, and that there is nobody who is entirely satisfied with the reforms that came in 2014 and the unintended consequences and impact those have had. So we are still waiting for the national review that is taking place and has been held up. But that's not entirely the reason for the overspend within the DSG. There are a range of elements that is around, including the fact that when the age of children with EHCPs extended to 25, no additional funding or resource came in to the DSG to accommodate that. So in that sense, more was expected to be done with less, and also a legacy where there were different expectations set by the ESFA than by local authorities. But Kate, I don't know if there's anything you would want to add to Councillor Elliott's question.
Thank you, Meredith. Just to say that the DSG is an area of concern because of the level of spend that we have. So we have a DSG task force which is looking at key areas of work. Some of that is around the expense that we see when children in need have got EHCPs, and that's not to reduce that, but to look at whether there's ways that we could be working smarter on that area so that we can get the efficiencies that we need. So if we've got a growth in demand, are there efficiencies that we can realise through that? And I'll be happy to bring feedback on that task and finish group to the committee in a timely manner.
Do you want to come back? That would be great, Kate. Thank you very much. Simon, do you want to add anything?
It was only, I suppose, to, in a way, leave our legacy to focus the mind of the next council, that if these pressures increase, and in particular, you know, obviously, as I mentioned, the number of children in care, if those pressures increase, I hope the next committee will robustly defend the directorate as we have done throughout this council.
Thank you for that. And of course, we've had a huge amount of success with our adolescents who are on the edge of care and the work, that specialist work that we've done with them. I don't think we've had, as a committee, any feedback or stats on the new group that was set up for younger children. I mean, I'm hoping that that is equally as successful. So it'd be interesting to see that preventative work that's being done, how well that's worked out. in the future. Thank you, Simon, and over to Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. If I could go back to the preschool funding, I am, and I hope I'm understanding right, that for the first half term of this school term, we are not reclaiming funding if the nursery has to close, unless the parent takes the child to another provider. But if the preschool cannot open because of staff shortages, etc., or having to close, what are our plans for the next half term?
So to a certain extent, that I think that's part of the issue that we are in conversation with DFE and RSC about how we get that clarity about how we create a sustainable mechanism within this lockdown for our nurseries. So funding for nurseries is based on census days. So obviously if for whatever reason a number of parents have decided that their children aren't coming to nursery anymore, and your likelihood of getting more children in this period is reduced, then that has a knock-on consequence on their funding, and so that's part of the conversations that we are having. So it's actually the children who are in nursery is how they get funded. So that's part of the problem. But Kate, I know that you probably have more information on that than I do.
Thank you. So I've just put into the chat bar, but I'm happy to clarify on that. So before the guidance came from DFE, we told providers last week that the immediate future we would use interim funding claims to process funding as normal. If children cannot attend due to COVID concerns, a family decision, we would not seek to reclaim that money from the settings. DFE advice obviously is now slightly different on that, but we've asked for clarification. So we will hold our position until we get that clarification from the DFE. The key thing is that we are funding providers on the numbers they're expecting, unless they close a setting again, but on a different basis than public health guidance. So we have got a couple of settings that have nursery settings that have closed just because they've chosen to close. We won't continue the funding for them because obviously that's a decision they're making, which is contrary to DFE guidance and isn't based on public health advice. We're also paying settings earlier in the term now to help them with the cash flow issues that some of you will have seen on the various spotlight programmes.
Can I check? Yes, I get all of that. I understand all of that. But a couple of the service providers that I'm working with have concerns because with a lot of the preschools, they are completely funded by the children they get through the door. But if our preschools are understaffed because their parents, for whatever their staff for whatever reason, cannot come to work, then, or if they have to close for COVID reasons, or if children are not coming, if the parents choosing to not send them because of COVID, what are our plans to support these preschools in the next term? Because what is going to happen is we are going to have preschools disappearing. I have been involved in preschools in the past. I have helped set them up. I do understand the funding, and I do understand how precarious they are.
So I think we hear you loud and clear, and I think that we have the same concerns as you do, and that we are having those conversations with DFE to get some sustainability and solidity into the arrangements. There isn't the same profile, or there hasn't been the same profile around the impact of COVID on early years providers as there has been of schools, although both have real issues, and for early years providers it is about that financial sustainability going forward. So you know, that is something that we are challenging and making sure that we get the right guidance coming out quickly from the DFE to support early years providers, but we're also doing all that we can on the ground to support them as well and continue to offer that support. Kate, is there anything you would want to add?
Yeah, I think just to provide some reassurance of how important we see this. This is escalated now as a corporate part of our corporate risk register. The early years provision is a standalone risk, so we are recognising both the risk to those provisions, but also the impact that potentially could have for our children in terms of accessing early learning.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you, Jackie, for that. Your cross was just to say that, Kate. Yes, you didn't want to add something else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Next I've got Councillor Burton. Over to you, Neil.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, and hope the new year is not too bad for you. I've got a few questions first, and how wonderful a paper copy is. On page 11, one thing did concern me, item 5.1. It said pay inflation 22-23, but I thought it was agreed that there would be no pay increase for local government officers next year. Not next year, the following year, because next year is already agreed. That's number one. Perhaps,
to answer that, so are you talking about the public sector pay freeze?
Yes.
So public sector
pay inflation, 1.5 million.
So public sector pay freeze doesn't include local government. Local government is separate to the public sector. There is separate conversations that take place and agreements. I can't see that we won't also have a pay freeze, but that's not been confirmed, and that's why the funding is there to make sure that we are astute in whatever the decisions could be.
Right, lovely. Thank you, Meredith. 5.2 on page 12. Is the 2.4 million higher than approved by full council? In other words, this 10 million that the government gave for social care, less children and adults, is the 2.4 what the children's services are getting, or is it more than that?
Meredith, are you happy that I bring Gareth in at this point? He's put across in that he would like to comment.
That would sound perfect to me.
Lovely, thanks. Go ahead then, Gareth. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully I can help with both of those questions. The pay inflation question, so the table and the 5.1 and the notes underneath there, Councillor Burton, sorry for misunderstanding. I think what we're saying in the paragraph there for note 1 is that 21-22 we are recognising that there's a pay freeze, so that funding isn't in the budget for 21-22, but it goes back to the pay inflation assumptions beyond 21-22. So that's why there's a smaller figure there for 21-22, albeit, as it says in the text, there are some exemptions for staff under 24,000, for example, but there isn't that pay inflation assumption for 21-22. The question then about the resources, I mean, it doesn't directly work out as the 2.4 million that you've quoted, but what we've done corporately, and a little bit of what Ellie was explaining earlier, is that we've factored in all the different resources, all the different grants, all the different funding sources that we have. We've worked out in that table at the start of 5.1 there all the sort of requirements for the service, and then balancing all those things over what the service requirements of the 79.4 million there for 21-22 is 2.4 million higher than the 77 million that was previously approved in February 2020. So some of the social care grant things will be the resources that are used to fund that growth, but some of that social care grant and some of the existing social care grant would have already been baked into the 77 million as well. So it doesn't necessarily work out directly, even though they are the funding sources that would allow that to happen.
But in other words, children didn't get half the money; they got only a part of it.
So it isn't directly a percentage splitting of the social care grant is the way that I would interpret it. I think there's a totality that is allowed for adults and children's. Obviously, as per the references to the adult social care precept and the adult social care growth and things, there are a number of growth requirements. I think it's fair to say between adults and children's that the growth requirements exceed what has been received in social care grant and things like the adult social care precept. So it isn't a directly percentage split, I would say. It's just funding the totality of all the overall requirements.
Right, fine, thanks. But then move on to page 15. I was a bit concerned to read refreshing halfway down 517 about refreshing and reinvigorating our approach to family hubs and integrated place-based services. Who's paying for that change? Will some of that come out of children's services, or will that be completely a council capital responsibility? Because moving premises is costly.
So there's probably, so what this doesn't refer to is estate transformation, which is what I think you're referring to. So the refreshing and revigorating our approach to family hubs and local family partnerships is really our work around ensuring that we have the right early intervention and prevention in place in the family hubs that we currently have. There is work taking place around the estate transformation work, which is looking at all buildings across the council and looking at where those are best placed and where they should be. That resources for any changes is held within that estate transformation work, and obviously those conversations about the benefits, both cost and otherwise, of making changes in the local area need to be assessed in that way. So we're not, the conversations that we're having within this paper are not looking at reducing or increasing family hubs. It's about maintaining what we have and making sure that we have the right service delivery to support our work around early intervention and prevention, as well as our more specialist work. But the estate transformation work is something separate, and certainly where we're at a point where family hubs are being discussed, I'm happy for us to bring something to Scrutiny Committee to have those conversations where decisions are needing to be made.
And also, if I come in as well, Neil, at this point, I think we always have to remember that when we talk about family hubs, we're not only talking about the premises, the building, we're talking about the sense of intervention work.
Yeah, lovely. And then just below that, I didn't understand, it said Pathways was a short breaks unit. It's a long-term unit.
So yeah, we phrase it short breaks within this terminology, but within our short breaks we've got some long-term residential as well as some short-term. So that's a misnote. So sorry about that. Yes. Yeah,
that's all right. No, seeing I visited them many times. Then I was a bit concerned about 8.4. The consultation included people didn't want to have an increase in council tax, and that is what the council will have to fight, I suppose. And lastly, I just wanted to know, this phone. I wanted to know, Meredith and Sally have been fighting our corner, as we say, for children. Do you see any real gaps, or is it, are you fairly comfortable with how it's panned out? Shall I ask that question? And I'd like Sally to comment as well. I don't see why she should be gagged.
I'm happy to, Sally, do you want to start, or do you want me to go?
If you just start, Meredith.
Okay. I think that we are, I need to choose my wording carefully. We are comfortable with the funding and the increase in the budget that we are receiving this year. I think that with all of that, there comes with strong caveats that if we continue to see an increase in demand or demand which we haven't got within our budget because of COVID and economic hardship, then that will be an issue. But we have had those conversations already with our finance team, and the conversations about making sure that there are early alerts where we are seeing that there is increased demand which the budget can't meet. Now, some of that will have to be meted out by making sure that we have the right interventions in place, and that we are looking to make sure that people are not in need for long periods of time. But there is a good, mature conversation that is taking place, which understands that whilst we have set out what we see our demand to be, that's based on current knowledge, and but that could change.
Yes. Is Sally there or not?
Would you like to comment, Sally?
I am here, Neil. Yeah, I think Mary just covered a lot of that there. I think we were kind of rescued by the extension of the Troubled Families Grant, and that's only for a year. So it's, as Mary just said, it's something where we're all going to have to, and the future version of the Children's Committee will have to look very carefully at how things are going. There's so many unknowns ahead, but it's likely that some of those will impact quite significantly on children. So this budget, yes, but going forward, definitely want to be something that everybody's alive to in terms of the impacts on young people.
Because if you're on the cabinet, members will realise that you've got to fight your corner pretty hard, or else you don't get anything. And well done to Meredith and Sally for doing that. Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
Here to that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure the committee would want to echo that, Neil, so thank you. Before we come to the end of discussions on this item, I just wanted to welcome Margaret Schwartz, who's the acting chair of CPFT, but according to the chat box, she's now disappeared again. So I've just said welcome, but she's gone again. So I'm guessing that either Joe or Richard.
She is on.
She's there. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome, Margaret. Good to meet you. Thank you for coming. Okay, I don't have any other crosses in the box. So final call before we look at the recommendation and ask for a proposer. Can't see any other hands up or crosses. Okay, in that case.
Madam Chairman, sorry, yes? I forgot something.
Okay.
Talking about nurseries, etc., and the new funds which the government offered, and then of course there's an issue. Can the council give a statement to explain how these funds work? Because I do think that I don't think the press were, well, I thought that they were ill-informed when they were on the television and that yesterday and before, and I just think that the public need to know how this funding works. That the centre gets so much for every child that qualifies, and if the child's not there, they don't get the money. And I just think that needs to be explained, really.
Happy to take that on board, and we'll have the conversation with our comms team about making sure that the press understand the funding mechanisms, and also we try and make sure that that's clear.
Yeah, lovely, thanks.
Thank you. I have two more speakers. Councillor Mustoe, who wants to say something around the recommendations, and then Councillor Thomas. So James first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, as has been the case in the past, I think it would be really helpful, I think, in the recommendations to really commend the work of the staff in the Children's Services Directorate. Particularly at the moment, looking at 517 in the report before us, I think it's just incredible the work they've been able to do throughout these unprecedented times. And I've had first-hand experience working with some of the people in those teams who, right back in since the first lockdown, have been continuing going out to visit people, these families' houses, and continuing to do their work and support these particularly vulnerable people. So I know the language in the recommendation can sometimes be a bit clinical and a bit cold, but I'd certainly be I'm happy to propose that we accept it, but I'd like to add an amendment that we put something to recognise the committee's gratitude for the work of the officers at this time.
Happy to
Thank
second.
you. And Simon was waving. Are you seconding that, Simon?
Happy to second, yes.
Lovely, thank Sorry, do you want to give us some words, James, of what you'd like to put in there? Do you want to have a little think? I'll go to Mike next, if you like. If you want to scribble something, that would be lovely, and I'm sure that would be welcomed by the committee. So while you're having a scribble, I'll go to Mike. Thank you.
I was going to second that, but the deputy got in first, so that's fair enough. That's the voice of Councillor Elliott comes through there. That's no problem.
Okay, thank you. I will just take a pause for just a moment then while James writes something. And we are doing very well for time.
Sorry, while we're waiting for that to come back, can I just ask that we are kept updated in respect of the nurseries and where the funding is going? Because I don't know about any other division members, but I have had quite a few of my providers contacting me for advice and support. So having it, and I've had to dig around to find it, so having that going forward would be helpful, please.
Yeah, we'll look at doing something like that. So Kate and I will take an action and make sure that Sharon and Carol are either, you know, we'll find a mechanism. Yes.
And my other question, going back to the other point that you made, when you said providers were choosing to close, who is deciding if they are choosing to close or if they're legitimately closing? Is this being assessed on the providers doing risk assessments?
Kate will probably want to come in, but I think that there are some providers who've just said, actually, we're not wanting to continue. So understandably, we wouldn't want to continue to fund those providers. We do have conversations with them, but public health, our public health team have been really, really strong and powerful throughout this pandemic, and have been offering advice to both schools and early years providers, both about safety measures, about supporting. There's conversations about level of staffing, and if staff are off with COVID or clinically extremely vulnerable and not being able to be in the premises, and all of those conversations are taking place to either say to a setting that they can't be open for a period of time because of COVID, or trying to find other mechanisms. So behind all of that, there's a huge amount of work taking place, but there are some providers who, in the natural scheme of things, there is always an element where people say, actually, you know, we no longer want to run this business, I think, as well. But Kate?
Yes, the two providers that have actually closed completely actually are related to one of our academies. So we are in conversations with the RSC, and I know the Regional Schools Commissioner is going to follow that up with them today.
So I suppose just to give you assurance, Councillor Gammon, we are all over this. We are making sure that we maintain those conversations.
Yeah, my concern is, if a provider, I'm not talking about the ones that don't want to continue with the business, if a provider is struggling to stay open because of staffing levels or because of children, but they wish to continue, but at the moment they can't open, who is deciding if they can? Is the provider being allowed to do its own risk assessments and make its own judgments without being penalised for doing so? Because really, at the end of the day, it is the providers that know that if they are safe or not.
Kate, do you want to come in?
Yes, so the providers do their own risk assessments, they make their own decisions. There are some nuances in there, so if it's due to staffing in terms of absence due to sickness absence related to COVID, then the funding continues. If it was because they just felt they didn't want to open, then we'd be having the conversation with them about how could we support them with their risk assessment so that they were able to stay open. What I would say is our providers have really gone over and above to make sure that they are staying open, partly because that's how they secure their own finances, but also because they absolutely recognise the important part they play in supporting our children and families in maintaining access to work, but also the learning and the importance of early years provision.
Thank you. I just needed reassurance because some of them, especially the one I've been talking to, has been afraid to make that decision to close because of the financial implications if they don't. And in COVID, they have enough to worry about without having to worry about if we make the right decision, we'll be penalised. So I just needed reassurance for them on that. Thank you.
Chair, with your permission, if there are providers who are anxious, if they contact Sharon Hindley, then they can have the conversation with her, because we've been doing individual conversations with a number of providers. So if members are aware of providers who are anxious, if they contact Sharon Hindley, she'll have a conversation with them to work through what we can do that best supports them.
Thank you. That's where I've been directing them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kate. Thank you, Jackie, for making that explicit. Thank you. James, I see you put the cross in. Tell us your words, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So my words are something like this, and it would be to unchange the recommendations 1 and 2, but to add in as a separate recommendation as well, that particularly given the unprecedented circumstances Cornwall finds itself in during the COVID-19 pandemic, that this committee commends the staff of the Directorate who have gone above and beyond in supporting some of our most vulnerable residents on the front line through this challenging time, and are a credit to this council.
So, don't know how quick that was, Debbie, for you to be able to get down. Do you
Sorry.
want James to? No. Do you want James to repeat it, Debbie?
Yes, James, unless you have it.
I have it. I have it written down. I can put it in the text box if you like.
If you could, and then I can read it, Chairman, to the committee. That will be
lovely.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Mustoe. Thank you, and we would take that as the third resolution.
Indeed. Yes, I can see that Julian has said he's happy to propose, but I'm presuming, James, that you wanted to propose that.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose mine.
And then I know that Simon offered, and but Mike, I think, was first in the chat box. I hadn't realised that was his cross was for. So we have a proposer in Councillor Mustoe, and we have a seconder in Mike, which is nice because it makes it cross-party as well. So that's lovely. So thank you. I hope that's all right with you, Simon.
Yes, that's fine. I wasn't reading the chat box.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Madam Chairman, can I think it should be more particular to the children and the families rather than vulnerable residents, because we're not doing it for everything. We're only doing it for the children and families. I don't know if that should be changed, not vulnerable residents, but something to do with children and young people and their families, or something like that. I'm not pedantic about it, but I just
wonder if
that's too general.
Okay, James, do you want to comment?
I'm happy to take his suggestion and say some of our most vulnerable children and families.
Okay, thank you. So that's over to Debbie then to read all three of the recommendations. We have a proposer and a seconder. So over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chairman. It has been moved by Councillor Mustoe and seconded by Councillor Thomas, and the recommendation is that 1, the underlying financial assumptions contained within the balanced budget proposals for 2021-2022 as set out in this report be supported and recommended to Cabinet. for the services within the remit of this committee, the budget proposals for the financial years 2021-22 to 2024-25 as set out in this report be supported and recommended to Cabinet. And 3, that particularly given the unprecedented circumstances Cornwall finds itself in during the COVID-19 pandemic, that this committee commends the staff of the Directorate who have gone above and beyond in supporting some of the most vulnerable children and families on the front line through this challenging time, and are a credit to this council. As I said, that has been moved by Councillor Mustoe and seconded by Councillor Toms. If we could go back to the roll call for members, and if you could indicate if you're in favour, against or wish to abstain. Councillor Applefold.
Councillor Applefold, for.
Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Councillor Burden, for.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Councillor Elliott, for.
Councillor Formosa.
Mark Formosa, for.
Councillor Frank.
Hilary Frank, for.
Councillor Gammon.
Jackie Gammon, for.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Councillor Harvey, for.
Thank you. Councillor Kirk.
Councillor Kirk, for.
Councillor Lennox Boyd is not on the meeting. Councillor Massey.
Councillor Massey, for.
Councillor Mustoe.
Councillor Mustoe, for.
Thank you. Councillor Rand.
Councillor Rand, for.
Councillor Rogerson.
Pat Rogerson, for.
Councillor Sawnby.
Councillor Sawnby, for.
Councillor Mike Thomas.
Mike Thomas, for.
And our co-optee, Katie Fitzsimmons.
Katie Fitzsimmons, for.
Thank you, members. Chairman, the recommendation has been approved unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. And thank you to the officers who've been answering the questions, and also to the people who've been working on the budget. So thank you very much indeed. And we've worked so well that we've got an extra 3 minutes for our comfort break. 2 now. So we'll take a break then until 11:30 when we'll come back for the second item. Just reminding you to put your mics off. Okay, thanks. See you in 12 minutes.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. So we're about to move to item 6, which is the Children and Young People Mental Health Strategic Plan 2021-2024, Turning the Tide, and that's on pages 24 and 77. Can I, before I come to Liz, who is going to present, I've asked Liz to keep it short. There's so much information in the document that she's just going to do a short introduction. But before that, can I welcome Sheila Lennox-Boyd, who's now joined us, and I believe congratulations are in order, Sheila. What lovely news in a bleak time. So I hope they're all well.
They are very well. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for letting me join a bit later.
Excellent, you're very welcome. And also to welcome Mark Rundle and Margaret Schwartz. Can I just come to Margaret? And would you be happy just to give us a 30-second, 1-minute introduction to Margaret, please?
Oh, hello. I'm acting chair at CFT. I've been a non-executive director until just last month at RCHT and CFT, as in helping to bring the two organisations closer together. But when Barbara retired, I stepped in as acting chair. By background, I'm an economist and I've spent my entire life in financial services, mainly around risk management, and been in Cornwall many years now. So thank you for having me here. And I'm particularly interested in improving the mental health of our children well before they reach our services at CFT. I think it's a failure when they reach our services, actually, and we need to concentrate on prevention, and that's why I'm here to support.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name is Mark Rundle. I'm part of the NHS Care and Clinical Commissioning Group, Children and Young People's Commissioning Team, and lead on the Transformation Strategic Planning for Children and Young People's Mental Health, which now encompasses moving up to those aged 25 going forward as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And I know we have met Liz before, but Liz, if you'd like to just briefly introduce yourself, and then we can start with your introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Hello. So I'm Liz Cahill. I'm the head of commissioning at the CCG for Maternity, Children and Young People's programme, and obviously work very closely with Lisa Harvey and the One Vision piece of work, because a lot of our planning work is very joint. Okay. Do you want me to get the presentation up? I've done a presentation, but I am going to whip through it. It really, I guess what I wanted to do is give you a sense of the document and give you a sense of the most important bits in the document to comment on, because I think there is something really critical about the fact that we're trying to outline a plan going forward for 21 to 23, but a lot of the document does do a historic, what have we done to date, and where are we at, and what is the impact that we think we're having. And so I know most of you, sorry I've not started here at the top, can everybody see the document? Can I confirm that? Yes.
Yes, we can see it. We can see it, Liz, thank you.
So as you know, we've been looking at mental health transformation for the last 3 to 4 years, really, and really this is very much, and these are very much a partnership approach. This isn't about just transforming CAM services, it's been about transforming our approach as a system, as children's services to mental health. So we've worked very closely with a partnership approach with schools, the voluntary sector, the NHS mental health services, with the local authority, and really have a very thriving partnership, I would say, which involves all of those representatives, and young people are at the heart of our partnership, and they often come and talk to us about their experiences of the services and help direct the way that they feel our services need to develop. We use the model of iThrive, that's not changing. That gives us a really good model to be able to plan our services, really. It's a framework to plan services. When we refreshed the priorities in 2008, they were the priorities. I know I presented this to you before, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, but you will see that some of these priorities are still key to us as we move forward. We've had significant investment right across the system for our children's emotional wellbeing and mental health, and I just really want to you know, a lot of the document highlights some of the really positive service developments that have happened, and I guess what it's like we've been at this for 3 years now, and so a lot of this has happened incrementally, and we're probably at a really good place now to move the service forward. But it did come from a position of not being, you know, not having enough help, really clearly not having enough help for emotional wellbeing and mental health in the system, and so. Whilst we've got all these services in place now, we weren't in a good position. So I think that's really important to emphasise when we look at the impact. We are increasing the access to therapies. We're hitting NHSE targets, but we will be revising those targets with NHSE next year and putting in some kind of more stringent targets, I think, about making sure that we're really reaching everybody that we need to reach. Young people have moved from saying, the document talks about this, from saying that they really didn't feel that they could get any help to feeling like they could get help, but there's still improvements. They're still highlighting improvements that we need to make, and we're really cognizant of that throughout the document, that young people's voice in how they want to have services delivered to them and the things that they think are important is really critical. So I guess this last year, we've learned a lot, I think, anyway, generally through this process of change, and we know where we've made progress and where we haven't as a partnership. But I think this last year we did some particular reviews of particular areas where we felt that we probably weren't getting it right. And so they have influenced the document. Also, this last year we've had COVID-19, and that is significant when we're talking about the impact on emotional wellbeing and mental health. As you will all know, we recognise that lockdown and the changes to the world of children and the opportunities they have to interact with others is really significant. And I think what we highlight in the document also is that we are still seeing a real number of very core challenges in our system. So whilst we've been at this for 3 years, we've put in the services that we needed to put in, we still have a journey to do. And I think that's really important. We've still got very high numbers of children in schools with needing emotional, social, emotional and mental health and support. We've still got high numbers of admissions for emergency departments. So we're not quite turning some of the key things that we need to turn, and that's probably because we're still at the beginning of the journey, so with the impact of what we've put in place and that isn't necessarily there yet. So I just wanted to highlight the areas of the priorities that are in the executive summary that I really would appreciate the feedback. So this is an opportunity for feedback. It's an opportunity for you to fill in the forms to feedback direct to Mark as well if you don't want to say anything in the meeting. But we wanted to take a life course approach, and exactly what Margaret's just said really is a real focus on prevention and early intervention, as well as getting treatment right. So in taking a life course approach, this is in the document, I'm not going to read it, we've very much looked at the 0 to 5s and the early years and that development of early attachment. And I think what we're seeing in our older population is where this is children who this hasn't been right for, if you like, where the adversity in the families has impacted on that early attachment work with, and we have piloted some ways of really improving that. So it's really positive pilots, but we need to do some really good work on really embedding that attachment approach in early years. We'd like to see some more integration of our early intervention support. So we've got some new teams. We've got all of the learning from Head Start Cornwall, Head Start Kernow. We've got the new mental health support teams. But we were thinking, how does that all fit with the needs of speech and language and child development and our education psychology? And I think this really sits within the health and belonging vision that I know that Kate Evans-Hughes is beginning to develop, because there is something about how we have that community team around the school approach to make sure early intervention happens, to make sure that we're giving the right expertise to families and to schools and to people working with the services. The second is integrating our planning as a whole system. So this is very much just about how we work with adult services. So so the adult, children, whole family agenda and adversity and trauma, and really linking in with the work of safer communities around their complex adults work, because those complex adults are also parents, and how does that impact upon trauma for children, and how do we get a much more whole system approach to that. The next priority we've suggested is continue to invest in therapy. We know that we need more therapy. We know that accessing therapy earlier prevents repeat need. So that's an ongoing agenda. The next priority, and we're nearly finished, is about a much more integrated approach to our adolescent risk and crisis. So we've had a huge amount of development in social care, of psychology support to foster carers and placement stability, and to social care teams. And then we've had the development of crisis teams in mental health. And I think this is really about how do we bring some of this work together and put the child in the centre and think about different ways of managing our children's risk and mental health difficulties together in the system, including those difficulties for children with autism and learning disabilities. And finally is as Mark has highlighted, that we're looking at what is our vision with adult services for a combined approach to 25. We've already started to have conversations about the adult transformation world and how this they've got a focus on 18 to 25 delivery and what that needs to look like for children. We've had children in the room with our adult service leads talking about their experience of this age of services in this age range. So this is really about putting the interprofessional collaboration between all services and children at the heart of that 18 to 25 young adults at the heart. I keep calling them children, they're not young adults at the heart of the 18 to 25 approach, you know, so that they're not dropping through the cracks. I think we have a massive opportunity to make sure that the difficulties that children might start to experience in childhood do not aren't pervasive into their adult life if we get this right. So that's the second or the final priority that we've set in the document. I hope that's giving you a good overview of where we think we're heading and where we want to head. And obviously this is all out to consultation at this time. The document isn't proofread and it's not written in an accessible format. That will happen later. We just wanted to get this in front of you early, really, and give you the opportunity to influence it at this stage.
Thanks, Liz. Yes, that was very precise and concise, so thank you very much. Let's open it up then to discussion, analysis, forward thinking. Okay, and first I've got Councillor Rand. Over to you, Julian.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Liz, for that. The first question that comes to mind, obviously we understand there are huge pressures on young people at the moment. Obviously, exclusion from school for COVID and all the other reasons is not helping. But is there any evidence at all to suggest that the academy structure has exacerbated the issue? And I mean by, excluding children and, particularly difficult children from the school and forcing or encouraging, let's put in inverted commas, encouraging children to be educated at home, however that's done. Thank you.
So I'm not an expert in the academy system and the world of academies, and so I might defer to more knowledgeable people on that. I think what I would say is school inclusion for mental health is really important, and I know that Kate Evans-Hughes and I were talking the other day about early intervention and making sure that we give schools support, and I think that's part of the priority in 2 is how do we support schools really with the difficulties they see so that we don't get to a point of exclusion. But I wouldn't like to comment on the issue around academies. It's really not my area of expertise.
Oh, okay, thank you. Kate, do you want to come in on that or not?
Yeah, and I think in terms of the presentation that you had at the previous scrutiny about the work we're doing, that encompasses academies and LA maintained schools. So there is a significant level of challenge in the system now, but that challenge is meted with support. So we've seen a number of schools where perhaps there was a potential for exclusion, that actually that exclusion has now stopped on the basis that the support has been put in place. So gradually what we're hoping to do is build up schools' understanding of where to go for that support, so they get that early intervention model and reduce the level of exclusions. And at the moment, certainly in terms of permanent, we are seeing a significant reduction, and that's not just related to COVID, because obviously last term schools were fully open.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And Mark, you wanted to come in on that?
Yes, I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity of detail. When we say mental health support teams in schools, the way that we've approached that implementation in Cornwall, the answer silly, is that it's actually much more about the population age primary. That's where we're targeting, but you don't actually have to be in a school setting. So electively home educated children can access mental health support teams, as can traveller or other populations that don't necessarily attend school in quite the way some others do. So they can still access help, not quite the point you were asking us to clarify, but I just wanted to put that, add a little bit of detail in.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I'm just checking the time, and I know Dorothy has said, oh no, sorry, it's David. I thought it was Dorothy. Okay. Jackie is next, please.
Yeah, picking up on the way forward, under priority 5, it talks about developing an adolescent mentalisation-based integrative therapy approach. How does this differ? I am aware of an adult mentalisation-based treatment plan, but how does this differ for young people from that? And also, is it not another word for DBT, dialectical behavioural therapy?
It is slightly different, Jackie. I'm sorry, and this is where we will get to put some plainer and simpler language into this document before it becomes public worthy. Particularly, there is a particular approach that is recommended in the iThrive model, and partly because children do not engage particularly well with therapeutic interventions when they are in a state of crisis. And so it's really clear that we have a cohort of children that we struggle to engage into therapy. And so this is very much about putting the expertise and the support around how we get children to move from being reactive, exactly what DBT would do, reactive to just the immediate emotion, to thinking about their emotion by supporting the people who know the children best, or who are working with the children who are already engaged in the children. So that's what we're trying to move to a kind of guided consultative approach to people who are engaged, rather than those children not getting a service because they're not engaging. And I think that's really critical. A lot of children who don't engage in therapy end up not getting a service from a mental health perspective. And so this is about how we get that expertise into the people working with the children to help them start to move forward and start to think differently about the way that their risk taking is happening because of their mental health.
I'm still unclear as to how it differs from, why we're developing a new strategy when dialectical behavioural therapy is of the same, from what I understand from the adult therapy. Is the children's one going to differ vastly from that? And does it differ vastly from DBT?
So if the children want to engage in DBT, then obviously that's a therapy that we would look to make available. I don't think it is as available in the children's services at the moment. The issue is a lot of these children won't engage in that therapeutic intervention, so that the model is slightly different. So we need to probably find a better way of writing that in that recommendation. It's about how do we engage children who don't engage in therapy? How do we help them?
Yeah, and I as well as someone that has worked for some considerable years with young people, the terminology there, the mentalisation, won't go down too well with young people, I don't imagine. I'm pretty sure it won't.
Okay, thank you for that, Jackie. Thank you, Liz. I'm really, that was one of the ones that I'd highlighted, and as to ask what on earth is that. So I'm reassured to learn that it will be easier for non-specialists when you've reviewed the document. Thank you. Okay, next I've got David, Councillor Atherford.
Just going back to Mark Rundle's comment that electively home educated children can also access the service. If memory serves me correctly, there's a big hole there in terms of numbers and who we know are electively home educated. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was an area of work we were going to look at, was it not?
Thank you, David. Meredith or Kate, do you want to pick up on that, please?
Yeah, so just to say, in terms of the Councillor Atherford's correct, there is a hole in that you don't currently have to register if you're electively home education. We're anticipating legislative changes in the next couple of months, so that would hopefully start to close that hole and that gap.
Can I just come back? I think we're all professionals in as much that we don't need to be guided by legislation. We can probably work it out for ourselves that that's information we should have, and if we are going to make an impact, we need to have those figures. And it's some time ago since we discussed this, and it still hasn't been done.
So currently, there is no requirement for a parent to notify if they're electively home educating their child effectively from birth. So that's where the gaps are. So if a child leaves a school, then yes, we do know, because you have to notify the local authority that that's what you're doing. But if you've always been an elective home educator, then there is no requirement for us to know about them. And it's fair to say the elective home education community quite strongly don't wish that to be the case, that they have to notify us. So at the moment, we would have no legal pathway, if you like, in which to go down that route, because you can't assume that there's a safeguarding issue, which would be where the legal framework would come in, unless you get a notification through a referral. So that gap is still there. That's not unique to Cornwall, that's a national position, which is why that legislation is being looked at in terms of requiring registration. So then we would have a complete picture. But you know, if a family, the other issue is if a family moves into Cornwall who have previously been electively home educating, we wouldn't know about them either.
And we wouldn't equally know about any safeguarding issues that come with them.
You would, yes, because if they were known to Children's Family Services, then there's a duty to transfer that information across from the previous Children and Family Services.
Okay.
Thank you for that, David. Next, I've got Councillor Elliott. Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at page 32 or page 5 of 50 of the policy itself. Obviously, the statistics of the fact that we're described as an outlier, I'm just picking on the admissions to emergency department for mental health, 129.4 compared to 88.3. That is quite high. Given all of the brilliant work that's been done by various organisations within schools, why are we still at this point where the figures are as worrying as that? I mean, I know how hard the Directorate's been working and other organisations. Why, after all of that effort, do the figures still look pretty alarming? What's going wrong in Cornwall that's causing this?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we really tackled with in terms of writing and reviewing the strategy, because obviously some of these figures, there is a delay in the public health figures, so some of them are probably about a year out of date, but these are the most live figures. I have also got the live figures, and we are struggling still with presentations of mental health for children at hospitals. It's definitely one of the key areas of focus. I think for me, this is why we took a step back in a way and started to look at, well, okay, do we need to do something a bit different in terms of preventing mental illness? Because are we still reacting to mental illness in children? And a lot of the strategy focus around getting in that early years, area, getting in where we're looking at family and family adversity and the impact of that on children. If I think about the cases that I become aware of that repeatedly admit into ED, we are talking children with a long history of trauma, and so I think that's why we wanted to take that step back and really look at the causational issues rather than just the reaction to the crisis as well.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Liz. I've got a few. So if I can't see Councillor Martin, who's visiting from the Health Committee, wants to speak after our committee, but I can't see anybody. Yes, I can, and see that's Neil. Is it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, over to you, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all these words are fine, but how are we going to ensure they're put into practice when they always complain that we haven't got enough money to do it or facilities to support these young people? I mean, it said on the news only a day or two ago that 4 school children commit suicide every week in this country. You know, how do you find them? Because, you know, eating disorders and that are very much hidden by the individual, and so how do you find these young people? Who's out there looking for them, as it were, because it's so easy to hide things. And I just wonder, we say these nice words, lots of them, but I just feel concerned that we say the right things, but I'm not sure if we deliver the right goods.
Liz, do you want to respond to that? I mean, I suspect the simple
Mark
answer
also wants to come into that. I think it's a really fair challenge. I think that constant review of are we doing the right thing for these children is something that we need to continually do. I think from my perspective, we have come from a position, Neil, of being very light on the ground in terms of support, and I think that's what we've probably been doing over the last few years is getting those resources. So we have put in a significant amount of resource into the children's mental health agenda. I think now it's making sure that, I think you're right, it's making sure that it's doing the right thing, and that's part of what we're doing in the plan, and making sure early identification of need is critical, and I think we have to work really closely with our universal services to ensure that happens. I think we've also done quite a lot of work with PCNs, so primary care networks, and training and an ongoing cascading of training and understanding of our early identification as well. So I don't think we're necessarily doing the wrong things. I just think we need to make sure that we're constantly reviewing that it's going to be impacting, and it's the impact of those things that is really important for us moving forward. Mark, did you want to add anything into that?
Yes, I think there's a couple of points really. One I think is we also need to recognise the lead times for some of these things. So we talk about being in year 4 and much to celebrate but much to do. But if we take something like mental health support teams, the lead time for recruitment, training and then actually implementing them is about 15 months. So our wave 1 are now literally coming to the end of their training at the end of this month, having had to extend their training from completing in October because of COVID implications at the University of Exeter. So our wave 3, a further extension of getting in earlier, getting into that primary school population, which is where we're focusing mental health support teams in Cornwall. They won't actually come to fruition actually on the ground, taking a caseload until March of 2022. Similarly, when we recruit additional wellbeing practitioners. So I think that's something else where lots of groundwork is in place, the recruitment is there, we just need to wait for that training and lead time to happen. But we're also looking out towards primary care networks. So we've been working with the Southwest Academic Health and Science Network to create 7 films about assisting GP practices identifying earlier the signs of things like what makes a good contact with young people to encourage them to engage, what makes a useful relationship building. We've also got one around eating disorders to raise the awareness of what you should be looking for and so on. And so lots of these things are happening. At the moment, we are being blighted in rolling those out extensively because quite rightly, lots of our health services are focused on the current COVID crisis. We've had to delay twice now the rollout of those workshop training tools to primary care networks, originally due to go in the autumn. That was pushed back until January, and now it's going to be pushed back by another 3 months because there's just not the capacity there to actually take on this learning at the moment. So those resources are there, they've been built. I think COVID is a distraction, but that's not necessarily an excuse. We do have some long lead times on some of this really transformational structural change that we need to put in place. The final thing I would say also is that the development of websites like Head Start Now and Mind Your Way, which we've nominated as being the 2 key portals. So we're starting to do cross-referencing around communication pages with Cornwall Partnership Trust, with the CCG, with Cornwall Council. So they all refer back to these 2 points, which we can then keep up to date. So again, it is about slow, structural, sustainable transformational change, and I think that's also why we're still seeing some quite high outline numbers for admissions, because we have a latent population of individuals who are still starting to flow through from 3 years ago, and what we're trying to do is to support those whilst avoid that being a continuing conveyor belt by getting in with things like the early intervention and prevention. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. I've noted that Lisa wants to comment, but I've just had a message from Debbie to say that Margaret has to leave soon. So can I just offer Margaret the chance to comment or question if she would like to? Margaret. Or maybe she's gone. It would appear so. Okay, Lisa.
Yeah, hi, Lisa Harvey, Service Director for Children's Health and Wellbeing. I think it's really important to reassure the committee around the role that school health nurses and health visitors play in the very early identification of emerging mental health needs, both in perinatal mental health and adult and child attachment in the very early years, but also, you know, the comments around more older children who may be displaying emotional dysregulation or early signs of mental health needs, and quite often it's the school nurse that picks those up and provides that early intervention and that early help. And the universal services of health visitors and school nurses are working with that population which fall below the threshold for children and family services, so not eligible for early help from those services, but are providing short-term interventions to help and support families and pass them on to other more specialist services as required. But all secondary schools have an allocated school nurse who links to all primary schools, and all children under 5 have a health visitor who they can contact. And we're finding through the lockdown, where children aren't at school, families and young people are making significant use of the advice line for school nurses and raising issues around emotional health and wellbeing. So just to reassure the Cabinet that there is a wide range of universal services out there picking up these early needs.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Neil, had you finished your questions? Did you want to come back?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I had an answer. The thing is, in this present time, you know, they say, you know, when they do this Downing Street briefing, how the mental health is a big concern and all the rest. But you know, we've got grandchildren, A levels and all the rest, primary school, but if they're all working from home and not going to school, and the parents are under fair pressure because they can't really cope with children under their feet every minute of the day, you know, who picks up that these children need some other support? That's what I'm concerned about. How do you pick up, you know, I don't know how many young people commit suicide in Cornwall last year, but you know, the national figure is not good, and a lot of those suicides go hidden. I always remember we had a sad suicide about 2012 in Cornwall, and that was a big family, you know, 5 siblings and all the rest, but it didn't make any difference, and nobody actually foresaw it within the family till about, you know, the services. So I just wonder, what method is there to actually, you know, because the school nurse is fine, but how can a school nurse operate at this moment of time?
Shall I come back in there? So the school nurses, through social media, advertise the advice and support line, and it's well advertised amongst families and children through schools and through social media. And young people and families do contact that line and do have conversations either over the telephone or through WhatsApp video or through text messaging to gain support and be signposted.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lisa. Kate, you wanted to come in?
Yes, just to say that during lockdown period, certainly in lockdown 1, and it's already happening again in lockdown 3, schools are making regular contact with families, doing check-ins and with children and young people, and anybody that a school is concerned about, they come under what's the vulnerable groups, so they would be entitled to placement in school. So if families were struggling and school were aware of that, then they are entitled to a placement in school.
So can I ask, where does the young person go? Because you try and get into a health centre at the moment, it's impossible, and then you've got a queue outside, distancing. Well, no 15-year-old is going to queue with people on Zimmer frames and all the rest and wait for half an hour. I went to pick up our prescriptions and I was 3/4 of an hour outside in this queue. Well, I mean, you know, I couldn't see any young person even willing to do that, and then they don't do it, and that's what I'm concerned. So is there another route through to the GP or whatever, the family doctor?
Charlotte, do you want to come in on that one before I leap in?
Thank you. Charlotte Hill, Head of Partnerships, Innovation and Wellbeing. Just to, I suppose, add that the existing organisations that we work with in the voluntary and community sector are still operating. So all of the normal ways of young people being able to engage with whatever is available to them, whilst it's become more challenging, there are route ways through using social media, and the family hubs are still open, and the voluntary and community sector are still very, very active in the community. This particular lockdown obviously is quite different to what we've prepared for earlier, and I think indicates and reinforces the points that Liz has made about why we need to be ensuring focus around prevention and early intervention, because all children are affected by the pandemic, and those who are vulnerable are going to be, their needs will be exacerbated by it. So the examples that you've been given already demonstrate that whatever the normal routes would be, whether it's GP, school nurses, voluntary sector, through the communication we've currently got and the enhancement of that, we are trying to ensure that we are going to be ahead of that need so that we can do something about it.
Thank you. Kate, you wanted to add something?
No, I think Charlotte's covered it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Neil. So I've got a few things I'd like to ask, so if I could take them perhaps one at a time. I mean, the first thing I want to say is how much I welcome the focus on the whole family, particularly at that first 1,000 days. That makes absolute sense. I know that it will be time consuming, and how good the funding will be, I don't know, but it makes obvious sense that that's where we start in terms of prevention. So I really welcome that. My first question is on page 31, where it talks about embedding the trauma-informed approach via Head Start and all the fantastic work that they've done. I just wondered if somebody could give me some idea of the take-up in schools. You know, that sentence, that bullet point, are we saying that every school now has that that approach and that concept at the forefront, or are we just saying some schools? That's the first question, please.
So I can answer that. So all schools across the primary and secondary sector have been targeted for that support. However, we've also been able to invite a whole range of services across children and family provision. So we've got practitioners right across Cornwall now, and I think we're over 1,000 practitioners who have either done the detailed trauma-informed training or a kind of summary of it. In terms of an embedded approach, there is still some work to do in terms of a whole school approach to the promotion of emotional resilience and mental well-being, particularly using the trauma-informed approach. However, I would say that it has the momentum has been building very steadily, and we are fairly confident with the proposals in place under One Vision, and particularly Kate's area around belonging and inclusion, that will be stepped up comprehensively moving forward. And it's definitely something that we, as Liz has outlined in the strategy, that we know can be beneficial, and we want to continue together with that Bloom model as well, which enables earlier intervention approaches moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're not quite there yet, but there is some momentum. That's good to hear. Liz, you wanted to come in, and then Hilary, who wants to come in on this issue as well.
So sorry, my ex was a prior thing, just to highlight that you do not need a GP referral to access children and adolescent mental health services. I think it's a really important thing. Anybody can refer you to the Early Help Hub, and so I just wanted to highlight that really.
Thank you.
Also, on the trauma-informed approach, I think there is also a trauma network that has been set up under the Safer Partnerships agenda, and so I think some of what we're considering is how we join the whole Cornwall approach to trauma from children through to adults. I think that would be a really hopefully a really positive way forward.
Thank you for that. And Hilary, you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, it's just a really passing comment in that I know that one of the youth workers in our local youth centre is also currently undergoing training for the trauma-informed approach, and I think that joined up partnership working is brilliant. Thank you for extending it to youth workers as well.
Thank you for that. And it's good to hear. I mean, I can't imagine that there can be many heads who wouldn't welcome work of this kind, but it would be reassuring, I think, for committee to know that there was somebody trained in all schools in Cornwall. Thank you. My next question.
Sorry, Chair. I also meant to say that the youth worker who's taking that training is absolutely loving it. She's inspired by it. So thank you for the quality of the training, not only that it's being extended out to the youth workers. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's don't apologise. That's really good to hear. Thank you. That's encouraging. On page 35, it talks about the connectivity again. Sorry to keep coming back to schools and primary care networks, and it talks about social prescribing, which of course we know is a positive thing. But I understood that the money that had come down from government was enough to cover trained social prescribers at surgeries, but didn't cover any money for families able to take up what was being recommended if it was something that had a cost. And obviously looking at where we live, and particularly my own division, but certainly vast areas of Cornwall with such high levels of deprivation, I just wondered how we make the match between a family being told this would be a good idea, but them having no finances to fund that.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is the difficulty in writing a 21 to 24 strategic plan, and I think this is probably one of the areas that is in its most infancy. I think it's very there as an ambition that as we move forward with the social prescribing agenda, that we really make sure that children have access to social prescribing. But I also am going to defer to Charlotte, because I know that there are some pilots in that you're currently looking at, aren't you, Charlotte? So I'll pass to Charlotte to talk about the pilots. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I know that Mark probably wants to come in as well. So Charlotte first, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Mark and I have been in discussions. So it is a developing area for the world of children, but it is quite complex in the sense that there is the referral part of that, and the activities as you've described, but some of it can be existing provision. So some of it is about knowing what is available and would be suitable for an individual child or young person, and also family. So family is very important in this as well. So we have done some testing, for example, with some troubled families, funding. We're currently working with community safety and the time credits programme, and looking at the benefits that approach can bring through volunteering. I know St Austell Practice have just appointed a children's social prescriber as well. So there is an active interest around this area, and also we are hoping that we will be able to mirror some work that has been led by public health in the adult social prescribing world to ensure that we can learn from the best of that, but also ensure that it is tailored for children and families' benefit. But Mark, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Thank you, Charlotte.
No, Charlotte, that's it. I just came on camera, so it's that I would have said exactly the same thing, so that's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
That just demonstrates how close the partnership we have.
Exactly the same. Yes, thank you. I note that Mike's put a cross in the box. Is it apropos this, Mike, or not?
Yes. I'm
coming now then.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to sit on the Health and Wellbeing Board, and I'm quite conscious that social prescribing comes up quite frequently, and it seems in a sense to be a National Health Service directive in a sense, in terms of having access to preventative activities. So that seems to be how I understand it, and being able to intervene in family life. But the way you described it, it's all very well having a person who can prescribe. That seems to be the first stage, is to get that, and they become like a community links officer working in the surgery. But to have a budget, that seems to be a political issue, and the National Health Service needs to be able to draw on, so that such social prescribers can actively encourage physically with money people to do things. For example, to join their local sports centre and to pay a membership fee for 12 months, something like that, or less, depending on circumstances. So I think it's an interesting area, and I think we need a bit of coordination between our various scrutiny groups and the Health and Wellbeing Board on this one.
Good, thank you. You're echoing what I feel as well. Thanks, Mike. Liz, you want to come in?
So I was just going to highlight that in terms of the kind of non-preventative stuff, so in terms of where children are eligible for additional resources because their need is very acute, we are also exploring personal health budget type approaches in a similar way. Things like that fall outside of the core NHS offer, like equine therapy, etc., whether that helps somebody rather than just the normal thinking of what can support. So we've had a first few examples of doing some stuff like that with very acute children with very acute level needs.
If I just could briefly come back, my experience of this seems to be that a lot of this money is really up to the National Health Service to decide whether it wants to explore these pilots, and then there has to be somebody on the other end who actually is willing to run with it. So are we conscious that we can actually ask for this money from central resources to actually start doing pilot schemes? Cornwall loves pilots. There are more pilots in Cornwall than in Gatwick. Well, that's obvious now.
Thanks, Mike. Do you want to pick that up, Mark or Liz, please?
I think this is where the join up needs to be, isn't it? In terms of is a lot of the stuff that's coming through kind of primary care network agenda and then the children's agenda. We just, like I say, this is we put this in because we recognise it's a really important piece of work, but it's probably very much in its infancy, and that opportunity to join up with what primary care networks are doing and the opportunities that NHS are offering is for children, to make sure children are a part of that, is really key to our to going forward. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. David, did you want to come in?
Yes, it might be just one of how this is laid out. Bottom of page 35, priority 4. I wasn't sure what I understood by we should seek to replace the thresholds for access to therapy, comma, with the principle of what will help, comma, to meet the ambitions of the long-term plan. Maybe it's the way I'm reading it. Could you just explain exactly how we're going to replace thresholds?
Yeah, so I think this is extremely ambitious, and I'm really pleased that you've highlighted it. I think it's always been an ambition in the children's agenda that that service delivery shouldn't be on the basis of a threshold, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily get a mental health CAMHS delivery. Does that make sense? So there is still a need to allocate the resource appropriately in terms of specialist resource and early help resource, for example, and to make sure we're meeting the needs of the child. But this, I guess, really sits with the work that we started in the Early Help Hub, where anybody who's being referred for a mental health need gets an offer, and that's our ambition, is that they don't get declined, they get an offer of support and help. Whether that offer of support and help is something that we engage them into the voluntary and community sector, or we identify that actually is another service that might meet their need better. But the idea is that it's not, you don't have to jump hoops to get help. If you need help, you get it, and that really is an ambition. I think I'll say it again, it's an ambition. I don't think we're there yet, but we're definitely better than we were a few years ago, where you had to, and the children, people used to say this, you had to feel like you were almost suicidal before you could get any help, whereas now they say actually there are a wider variety of support and help and offers there, and they are being appropriately directed to them. So we keep that ambition really in sight.
That's a really useful change of mindset, because whenever I make a referral to adult social care, the stock response is you don't meet our threshold. So that's really refreshing to hear.
Yes, thanks, David, and that is very encouraging. Before I go into my next question, which in fact David's comment leads into very well. I can't find my list of timings, so I just want to ask Debbie, how are we doing time-wise, please, for this item?
Absolutely fine, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
About another 20 minutes or so.
Lovely, thank you very much. So what David had said about thresholds leads me on to my next comment, which is the chart on page 56, and that's not exactly thresholds, but innate within the things described on there of the workforce development and the different skills and offer from people. I want to get a feel, if you like, of what level the training, the input, the output as well from them, and the skills and good practices that those various, so we've got CAMHS at the top, we've got the mental health support teams in schools, and we've got wellbeing practitioners. And I know that when the health committee asked for the briefing and the development session on children's mental health, it was not about the therapies per se, it was about access and about levels. And like David, I'm really happy to hear that we're looking at being able to meet a need at some level for every child, and that is refreshing and it is encouraging. But briefly, if possible, could you just give me a feel for where those different practitioners are going to sit, and how parents, children themselves, will know which level they should want to be accessing and what that they can offer? Sorry, it's a bit of a garbled question. It wasn't very precise.
No, it's fine. I will answer this to begin with, but I know that Charlotte and because there's quite a lot of training and workforce development in there in schools, and Mark as well, because he's very embroiled in the wellbeing workers and the mental health support team in schools. Workers might want to come in with some more detail, but I guess the principle at the moment that we've got is that all referrals for help come through the Early Help Hub, and they are triaged in the Early Help Hub, and that principle is because we don't want to be missing anybody that really does need specialist support. As we move forward, we might think about that, because I think there is something about how we make things more accessible in the community and through things like family help hubs. But at the moment, that if somebody wants support, they generally come to the Early Help Hub. Once it's triaged, there's a really wide variety of support now. Is what I'll say is there's we have that at the moment we have the Bloom networks, which really help decide where it's not quite right for a specialist CAMS service, but we do need support. So who's out there in the team in terms of voluntary community sector, in terms of the workers in the TIS program, etc., who might be able to pick up the child, what might be able to help, and that's really guided by our psychology teams, and so they really help the teams in the community really support those decision making. So it's very, very consultative, which I think is really helpful, because sometimes people feel like they're holding a lot of risk, or they're holding a lot of need that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with without that support and help to back into the service. Then wellbeing workers are very much early interventions. They are all trained in evidence-based intervention, but it is early evidence, so it's where children have mild to moderate mental health need. It's not an emerging mental health need. It's not it's not the higher end. Similarly, the mental health support teams in schools are all where it's emerging mental health need, a mild to moderate need. It's not the specialist services. Where we come to the specialist services, we have the CAPS, our specialist service. Yeah, so remember, we had all of that with the clinical associate psychologists. So they're a part of the specialist service offer, which will deliver the pathways of care for those who have got more moderate and complex mental health needs, where they need a longer term, potentially evidence-based intervention. So that's more how it shapes. But there are also other options for children. There are online options. I'm not going to speak there at the moment. The service is Couth, but I think there's some changes because that's being recommissioned at the moment from the local authority. And Mind Your Way also have some kind of guidance for people and self-help options. So there's a lot out there in terms of information, advice and guidance as well for families. And as Mark was saying, there's those two portals, if you like, that are written by children for children, helping understand what's available in the system for help and support. So they are the two, I say, pivotal places that we would encourage parents and children themselves to go to really help them understand what's available for them.
That's great, thank you. I think I don't want to be negative at all, because obviously this refresh is very exciting. I just want to flag up a slight wariness of the levels of expertise and knowledge, because sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and if children are going to be moved up through the various levels that you were describing, I want to be reassured that work isn't being done at an introductory level that might be counterproductive and might be even dangerous, because and I can hear Councillor Gammon, who would, as a therapist herself, would actually be saying, and maybe that's what she's going to say. I just want to be certain that we are very, very confident of those skills at the early intervention, that they're not doing anything that might be damaging further. I don't mean to be negative.
No, it's fine. All of the wellbeing workers and the mental health support teams in schools undertake an evidence-based training for a year or so at the Exeter University. It's all NHS prescribed training, so it's not a general training session. They are trained workers.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant to hear. Thanks, Liz. That's great. Thank you. Really good. A year's training. That's really good. And evidence. That's great. Thank you. Councillor Gammon.
Yes, sorry. I have two questions. One is, what specific training are we giving these workers to recognise and to work with or refer on to drugs and alcohol? Because I am now a drug and alcohol therapist for adults, and I am discovering, as well as I am seeing younger people coming through my door, I'm also discovering that a lot of my adult clients have been using, some of them as young as 8, 9, 10, and it hadn't previously been picked up. And my other question is, what are we doing? How are we, I guess, are we reaching what I call the hidden clientele? And in that, I specifically think about young people that are being groomed, that are being sexually assaulted, because they quite often, again, in my adult work, I had a lady the other week who is nearly in her 70s, that it is the first time in her life she has disclosed that she experienced this. And they are very clever at concealing what is going on because they have been so well groomed.
Yeah, I think sexual exploitation is a significant crossover with you know, our mental health need cohort, and I know that the work of the is it MACE, I don't know what it's called here, when they monitor the children that are being sexually exploited, that they are really conscious that a lot of them also potentially interface with our CAM service. So I do know that in terms of our risk support model, sexual exploitation is a real critical factor in thinking about the risks that children, what we probably see when we're talking about very traumatized children, isn't it, is that they present at all sorts of different places. They don't necessarily present to mental health. They present in drug and alcohol services. They do present at risk of sexual exploitation. They present in the youth offending service, and that ambition of how we have a much more holistic view of risk and mental health, I think is in the document. I don't think we've cracked it yet. I think we're very conscious that we need to think wider about adolescent risk. But I would also say, yeah, Jackie, thank you. I do think that comment's really helpful around the drug and alcohol and the crossover with drug and alcohol use. And it's probably something that we haven't put enough in our thinking in the plan. And I'm ashamed to say that because I used to be a drug treatment worker for young people, so I probably should have picked that up, and I will pick that up with Kim Hager as well, because she commissions the drug and alcohol service, and perhaps that dual diagnosis and understanding of the interrelationship between the children who have substance misuse and mental health is something we need to pick up as part of our planning going forward. Thank you. Mark,
Mark, you want to come in now?
Yes, I was just trying to think about how we could conceptually sort of phrase this for our purposes here, because this is, if you like, the real heart of what we're trying to change. So I'm just going all the way back to Councillor Atherfold's a comment about how do you go from thresholds, how do you not have them. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do with the Thrive framework is completely change the way we look at this, as away from are you ill enough to what has happened to you. And if you ask the different question, and this is coming out from research by Peter Fonagy and Anna Freud quite recently, if you change the question, what you then get is a different solution, which absolutely sits with, I think, the interim chair of CFT's point about we failed if they come to us. It's Cornwall Partnership into Specialist Services. So the Thrive framework is really about saying, how do we structure something that says all the way through the age range from 0 to 25, you have access to mild, moderate and specialist help? And then how do you actually frame around that all the other things which in actual fact may be more appropriate? So you may have an individual that ends up in specialist mental health, but in actual fact, as the clinical lead for children, and Timothy Hawkins aptly put it, they're carrying this bucket of trauma with them. And so one of the things we have to do, as well as stabilise their mental health, is start to erode that bucket of trauma that they've got, because otherwise all we're doing is keeping them in stasis. They're not improving, but they're not getting worse. And what does that mean? So what we're trying to do is to reformat how we look at presenting need, to be thinking about what's happened to you. You need some mental health help now, you need some housing help, you need some debt help. And if we get the debt and the housing right, oh look, your anxiety is reduced, and therefore we can actually have mild to moderate support for you rather than specialist. And so what's critical is what we've built over the last 3 years with Charlotte and Kim Hager. All of us sit together on the transformation group for children's mental health, but it is taking time to develop that really transformative narrative at the same time as, for example, you all need to do mental health support teams this year, you all need to do something else this year. And so we're tying in all those initiatives which allow us to put a trained individual across that age range. And what we're able to do then is, if you have someone who comes forward who's really complex, well then what we need to be thinking about is, where's the best place to start and what combination of approaches do we need to put together to help this, rather than just going through them sort of sequentially. Hope that helps. There is some background noise, so I do share an office with someone, so apologies for that.
Yes, thank you. Somebody was just commenting. Thank you for that. Again, that's very, very encouraging, Mark. Really encouraging, that whole different way of looking at it. I like the idea. We need to ask the questions. That's really nice. Thank you. Charlotte, did you want to add anything, or?
It was just to just to extend the workforce discussion. So for all of our commission providers, there is a comprehensive training requirement on them for those really core competencies around drugs, alcohol, etc. So the Our Safeguarding Children Partnership, there's a comprehensive training offer through that, as Liz has said, through Kim's World, and the youth element of that is Wise Up. It is something, as Liz has said, that we'll probably need to revisit in terms of potential rising need, and it is a very modestly funded service and has been for some time. It's also important to flag that through the PSHE curriculum that is currently being rolled out in schools for children and young people, there are complementary modules so that they're learning about healthy lifestyles and all of the issues that go with that. They are getting taught that, and there's also some complementary work being done with parents so that that learning is reinforced. So there's a real combination, and as Liz and Mark have described earlier, and this whole I Thrive framework, we are trying to look as holistically as possible so that the support required is tailored to the need of that child or young person.
Thanks, Charlotte. Did you want to come back, Jackie, or was that okay?
Yeah, I'm still unclear, and I know it is an extremely challenging and difficult area to identify what I call the hidden children, but I still don't. It still unnerves me that I don't see anything there to work towards. Yeah, I'm not being very clear on that, but yeah, I'm still unsure as to how we are striving to identify, because as most of us know, both families and children are very capable and do hide all of this.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Liz, you wanted to pick that up?
I think it's something, bear in mind this is a consultation, so if people think there's something that we're not quite getting right, then that's really helpful for us to hear that. I think there is something, isn't there, about this being a whole system approach. And some of the work that Lisa was talking about earlier, some of the work in terms of supporting schools identifying need, all of those kind of things have to be a part of this as well. And as Charlotte said, that the training in helping people identify harm and risk and the impact of harm and risk and what that looks like for children is all there. But if there is stuff that we think we're missing, I don't disagree. I think we need to really listen to, are we missing children? Are children falling through the gaps? Is there anything we can think of that's different to making sure that we are identifying any hidden harm that we're seeing and I agree with you. If you're seeing it in adult services and adults are disclosing stuff that has happened to them in children's, you know, in their childhood that hasn't been picked up by our services, then we're not doing the right thing in identity, you know, quite yet, are we? So I think that's something we will take back and think about further.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, because I do, with the older adults, I do understand, because it wasn't talked about with some of them. But when I'm seeing clients that are in their early 20s that haven't been picked up, that is concerning me.
Okay, well, thank you for raising that, Jackie, and I'm sure that that from what Liz has said, they're welcoming your input on that. Thank you. Charlotte, did you want to add anything before I go to Councillor Martin?
Yes, it was just to say that the Trauma Informed Schools training is all about building trusted relationships and enabling adults working with children and young people to be able to ask questions in a way that might encourage disclosure, but also understanding the importance of building trusted relationships, so that there is a more that there is a culture shift, frankly, in how children's needs are better understood, and you know, for that very reason, that this can be contained and hidden. So there are modules in that training that do cover those issues, but also the trauma informed network and the strengthening of that, as Liz said earlier, between the adults and children's world, so that we, you know, we're preventing those issues that Councillor Gammon is describing, that has been undisclosed abuse that goes into, you know, old age. So we really do need to stop that.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlotte. And right, I'm going to move now to Councillor Martin. Thank you, Colin, for your patience.
That's all right. I can see everybody is carefully timed their thing, so I've got 60 seconds to say everything that the Health Committee wants to say on this. Thank you very much for that presentation, and that report. In a way, it's stolen our thunder. We've been talking on the Health Scrutiny Committee for several years about some of the serious concerns we've got, and in the time that we've been talking about it, we seem to have fixed a lot of the problems. We've identified that there's still some gaps to solve, and then you've written a report that says we know there are still these gaps to be filled. So I'm feeling encouraged that we're heading in the right direction. We were on the verge of setting up a sort of one-day evidence gathering thing, listening to young people and taking their views, which we would hope to pass on to you. But then you say, well, now we've consultation now on this document, so that will be again going out to the public and hearing what they want. So the last thing then is, I think that there are definitely some views unable to be here today because we had a clash, and even if we had been, we've kind of used up the time available. I understand that sort of protocol and constitution says this can only be formally brought to one committee, and it's perfectly okay that it's been this committee, not the other committee. I wonder whether there'd be chance in the course of the next few weeks for you to come and spend an hour or two at an informal briefing with the adult committee, so that we can tease out some of the points that I know colleagues will want to add in. Just to then make a couple of the points that spring to mind. First of all, social prescribing. Yes, it's been talked about in adults for a few years, and exactly the points that people have raised. The money's there to refer people, but not to actually pay for any service when they get there. More pilots in Cornwall than Gatwick. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And to mix the metaphors, what we do is the pilots get these things up in the air, and what they're hoping for is that the NHS air-to-air refueling tanker will be there to keep them going. And in fact, they just get up there and find that there's nothing, and they fall to the ground. And that doesn't seem like the right way to do things going forward. I think the emphasis on relationships, and that the young person getting their support from the person that they have the best relationship with, I think that's massively important. I think there's a possible snag there, that the person they've got the best relationship with might just not have the tools to be able to give them the high level of support that they need. And so maybe there's a scope for, I think there was something mentioned in the report about some kind of key worker. The person you've got the best relationship with will follow you through on your journey and see how you're getting on with those different interventions. And if it's not working, they can help you to get it back on track, or take you to somewhere different. I also wonder, I think it was really insightful, something I hadn't sort of verbalized before, what you said about sometimes it might be the right service, but the young person isn't in the right frame of mind to engage with it, and they need that space to be able to deal with their immediate emotions before they can then get involved with that service. And I'm glad to see that you're addressing that. Part possibly of that is sometimes I've heard young people say, yes, I was referred to that service and I just didn't like that individual practitioner, so I'm never going back to any service that organisation offers ever again. And I just wonder, do you have it as part of your way of working, that if someone says, you know, I just don't really get on with that individual, can we try the same thing but with somebody different? Is that normally an accepted way of working, or is it kind of, well, take it or leave it? If you don't want the person that was put in front of you, then you sign yourself off the service and you're gone. And the last thing really then was to mention, it's clear to me that the clinical associate psychologists being in schools have made a real difference, and that's brilliant. I hope to see that continue. But declaring a personal interest, I work for WAVE, which is the alternative provision in Cornwall. And whilst there's a clinical associate psychologist attached to every mainstream school in Cornwall, I don't think that we've got one attached to WAVE, where we've got some of the most, some of the most challenging set of young people in Cornwall who haven't been able to cope in mainstream, and so perhaps that's an oversight that might get filled in. But overall, thank you very much, and if we could catch up outside the meeting to arrange another meeting, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. I'm just going to come back and thank you. Really welcome your input and your support. I want to say really clearly that this is a partnership plan, and the reason that I think we're probably starting to get the feedback that we're identifying the right thing is because we're working really closely in partnership. And I want to give a lot of credit to Mark in how much work he has done to pull together that partnership and keep that partnership on track and keep that partnership developed, you know, and pulling a lot of external support from outside of, from the iThrive network to facilitate our thinking, and so I really do want to give him a lot of credit for really, his role in really pushing that forward. But I think that probably is, and the listening to children and young people, I think that is probably why we're starting you're starting to see the things that you're concerned about in the plan, because we're trying to very proactively make sure that we're not just sitting in a box over here. We're listening to everybody, and we're listening to our young people in particular. I would normally jump and say yes, absolutely, we'll come and deliver help. I think we're in a bit of a funny position at the moment as a CCG because of the current COVID crisis, and we may see ourselves redeployed a little bit in the next few weeks. So I will have to put a proviso on that. As long as I'm around or Mark's around, we're more than happy to help and consult elsewhere, and with the HASOP in an informal session. But as long as we're allowed to, really, and if we get pulled off to support vaccination centres, etc., then that might happen. So I guess that's the proviso I put on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Colin. We're now overrunning, so I've got one last comment or question from Jackie. Can I ask you to be brief, Jackie, and whoever's going to pick this one up, could you also be brief, please, so that we can move on to Sally's input? Thank you.
Yes, sorry, just picking up on something Colin said there about strategically. There is a movement towards, I mean, Sowena now has young people up to the age of, able to use Sowena up to the age of 25. Mental health for young people is crossing over to the age of 25 because it is recognised that just because you reach an age of 18, you don't become an adult overnight. I think strategically, and I don't know where we go with this, it's something I guess I'm saying to you, Pat, as the chairman, and maybe to Debbie, I think we need to look at this strategically, that there isn't a clear divide anymore between young people's mental health and adult mental health.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. I hear what you're saying, because one of the difficulties in the past has been that crossover, hasn't it? Where you stop being a child at this particular day, and then therefore everything else is dealt with in a different sector, which may not follow through on the styles and the content and whatever. I mean, it would have demanded always a huge degree of evidence of what's passed before the young person is moved on. So yes, it's a very valid point, and if it doesn't have to have that disjuncture in the middle, it's got to be good. But thank you, Mark. Can I ask you to be brief, please? Thank you.
Yes, just really a very real-time update on where we are with the considerations up to age 25. So I'm working with my adult commissioning colleagues and adult provider colleagues on the second submission of the Adult Community Mental Health Transformation Plan, which is due submission on the 20th of January, and I'm hot-footing it from this meeting to there for us to actually tidy the wording on what our approach will be for up to 25s. I think the one thing we need to add into that whole debate about you don't become an adult just because you've turned 18 is the developmental and compromised developmental. So you may have someone who's age 20, but because of their adverse childhood or trauma, which only then starts to present quite late in adolescence, their development is really about 15 or 16 years old. And so what we're looking for is how do we create a culture of a combined approach, again, which is not your age says this or your threshold says this, but in actual fact your need says this. And so should you be 23 and still accessing what you might call more child orientated, or are you 18 and in actual fact need to be quite happily accessing orientated? And this is really just starting now. So if you think about where we've taken this 3 years to get to this point with children and people, we're just starting to explore this with our adult colleagues. And so this is a whole new kind of dimension of approach which we're having to open up with them. But that's, as I say, the next milestone for that's the 20th, this time next week, where we'll put in our first statement about our plans for up to 25.
Thanks, Mark. And the document, the very comprehensive document that's before us today, uses the word refresh, and what you've just said about that and this approach is incredibly refreshing to hear, because it's far more holistic and it's far more person-centered rather than medical-centered. So music to my ears, and I'm sure to a lot of the rest of the committee. Right, yes, Jackie's also said thank you in the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to look to Debbie now. We have a recommendation on page 24 about providing their feedback. Now, I'm not sure which way we're meant to do that, whether it will be Debbie's, as always, incredibly comprehensive notes that she takes, and that is the feedback you're looking for, or is there some other format that I'm missing?
There is a feedback sheet that we can circulate as well if people want to give individual feedback, but obviously we'll take absolutely the notes that Debbie's done and the notes that we've made as we've been talking to you as part of that feedback.
Thank you. Debbie?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the minutes will be provided to Liz and Mark, but also before Christmas, members of this committee and the Health Committee were also sent the Turning the Tide document. So members, in addition to the submission that goes from today's meeting, are more than welcome to put in individual responses in addition to anything that's been raised today.
Thank you. So then we can go to look for a proposer and seconder and go to the vote, I understand then, Debbie. Yes?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Right. Could I have a proposer, please? Oh, sorry. Jackie, is that for to propose?
Yes, Chair. Happy to propose.
Okay, thank you. And then I've got Hilary. You seconding, Hilary? Yeah.
Yeah, happy to second or even second.
Right. Okay. Right. You've said cond. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So we have a proposer in Councillor Gammon and a seconder in Councillor Frank. And over to Debbie for the roll call then, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Again, we will do a roll call with the members who are on the meeting. So the recommendation as being proposed by Councillor Gammon and seconded by Councillor Frank is that the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee acknowledge the content of the draft Turning the Tide Strategic Plan update for 2021-2024 and provide their feedback on its contents to the authors by the 13th of February. That obviously that is in addition to the comments that are going forward from members today. So I could start with Councillor Apperfold.
Councillor Apperfold, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Burden.
Adele Burden, 4.
Councillor Elliott.
Councillor Elliott, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Formosa.
Mark Formosa, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Frank.
Hilary Frank, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Gammon.
Jackie Gammon, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Adrian Harvey, 4.
I understand Councillor Kirk has now left the meeting. Councillor Lennox Boyd.
Councillor Lennox Boyd, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Councillor Massey, 4.
Councillor Mustoe.
James Mustoe, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Rand.
Councillor Rand, 4.
Councillor Rogerson.
Pat Rogerson, 4.
I think probably Councillor Sawnby has also left the meeting. Councillor Mike Thomas.
Councillor Mike Thomas, 4.
Thank you. And Katie Fitzsimmons, our co-optee.
Katie Fitzsimmons, 4.
Thank you, members. Chairman, the recommendation has been approved unanimously.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you to all of you who've been presenting today and chipping in. So we're really grateful, and good luck with the consultation and the progress that is being made. It's very heartening to see. Thank you. My apologies, we are over time. We're now passing to agenda item 7. You've had Sally's report, and we can go to her for questions. Do you want to say, Sally, anything, or are you going to take your report as read?
I'm going to take my report as read. I've scribbled down a few notes, as I usually do when you're talking. And at the top of those, I've actually said that I really think, I probably don't say this enough, but thank you to your committee, because actually all the things that you say during the discussion about the budget and discussion about the mental health paper, etc., are really, really useful and valuable. And I probably don't remember to say that often enough. So things I'd noted down as we were going through, not in any probably logical order, but I know that we were talking then about all sorts of things to do with the mental health, and there were some conversations there about suicide. And I just note that the risk seems particularly to be out of lockdown. So there's lots of debate nationally about why that might be. Some of that's about actually it's actually quite difficult to achieve during lockdown. So what we've had is issues as soon as those lockdowns have been relaxed. So that is one to watch out for. In terms of the conversations around CSE and CSA and mental health, I think that was something that I was pleased to see come through in the conversations. I knew that when we were writing those strategies, the abuse strategies, I was particularly interested to make sure that there's a reflection in there around the mental health needs at that point. So our strategies include intervention at the point of trauma, but we all need to remember, as we know, that trauma has a long-term impact, and it may be that sometimes later problems occur, particular problems occur. I know that in having those discussions, what I've been reminded of is that there's also individual choice about who holds that information about what your past might be. So I think that needs to be reflected too. I think it's important to acknowledge that last time I spoke to the committee, I talked about Healthy Start vouchers and there was more information to follow. So I know that the lovely Jamie, who you all know works very hard, has had various things that have diverted him recently, but absolutely we are committed to making sure you do have the localised data and some pointers about ways in which you can help to encourage that take-up of Healthy Start vouchers. You probably will have seen that we've been doing some messaging on the pressure in schools. We've got, I think, 13.4% approximately of children in schools at the moment, and that was 1.6 when we were in the first lockdown. So you can understand that for schools it's quite a trying time trying to manage those children who are attending schools and also the remote learning. So any of your help around that messaging, and it is nuanced, isn't it, because we understand that we need critical workers in school, but it's also the case that sometimes some of those critical workers are also able to work from home. So a sympathetic conversation with their school is what we're encouraging people to do. You will also have seen quite a lot of conversation around food parcels over the course of yesterday. Certainly the night before, I was sent a picture that I was most disappointed by in terms of the food that had been provided via one of our schools. So we have written to all the caterers and we'll be processing what their responses have been. It's been the feature of Cape Institute's webinars with schools and the education bulletin to remind schools that we are looking for quality food parcels if that's the route they go down, that those food parcels are nutritiously worthwhile and that they are value for money. So I think that I can see over the course of the day that there's been a number of schools who've switched over to a voucher offer, and I believe that the government will be coming through with both a voucher offer from them, but also some ways in which individuals can talk to their schools and schools can talk to DfE around whether there's any compensation needed in different situations where people have been shortchanged. So that's a very quick skate through of some of the things that are on my mind. Oh, I've missed two things, sorry. There was a point earlier by Councillor Martin about the clinical associate psychologists. Unfortunately, the colleagues from that paper have left, but my understanding is that the clinical associate psychologists sit in a school, but they're not for that school population. So I would say that yes, WAVE, but also our virtual school and the special schools wouldn't be covered under that provision if you saw it as just about serving the people who are in that building, but actually they use the same processes to meet the need of young people in that geographical area. And I think to pick up on the point that Councillor Gammon was saying at the end, I'm very, very keen that we move towards a system that says we will talk about up to 25, and we know that we've got that in some areas. We know that we talk about that in terms of care leavers. It's good to see that thinking coming through the mental health strategy, but we do need to see that as something that happens across the piece. I think we're all converts to the notion that your adolescent brain means that you're still in what I know that young people won't want to call them, won't want to be called children, but there's that connection there that up to 25 it makes a lot more sense to all of us, the way that people think about that cohort. Mine's 23 and I still can see that, you know, child works sometimes, but that's something we're working on, and I'd really dearly love to see that going across all of our systems. We're not really there yet, but it is absolutely a strategic ambition. So I think Jackie's right to highlight that. I'll stop talking so that you have an opportunity to ask any question.
Thanks, Sally. And I've got two at the moment, three, four. So Hilary first, thank you. And then I've got Julian and Jackie after Simon. think it was it? Yes.
I think
Sorry, it was Simon.
Was first.
Yes, I beg your
Does
pardon.
Simon want to go?
Thank you. I'll try and be quick. I had a election leaflet through the door in Penzance, and it said children with special educational needs, SEN, and this is in Cornwall, are being failed. Prior to lockdown, the situation was not good, but since then, their support has been frozen. Would you agree with that statement? Because I'm not sure it's something that I would recognise.
So I'd be uncomfortable making a comment based on what you've told me, Simon, but if you'd like to forward that to me, then I can certainly put back in writing to you. No, I would not agree that support has been frozen. I think this committee is well aware of all of the ways in which Together for Families is trying to help support families. Do I think that some families will absolutely have had an incredibly hard time? Yes, and that's undeniable, and will be doing, particularly during periods of lockdown. But I don't know the context in which that line comes, so I'd be happy for you to send that to me.
Very happy to send it to you. It made me very cross.
Thank you, Simon. Hilary.
Yeah, yes. I think if it had come through my letterbox, it would have made me cross as well. Sally, thank you for putting out messaging about the numbers in schools. I think I'm seeing locally there's been quite a lot of angst from the primary schools here about how many children are actually in. So thank you for that comms that you put out. And you started off your comments by saying thank you to us, but also, blimey, Sally, thank you to you. You've got children and public health at a time when COVID hits, and you're coping with it so calmly and smoothly. So thank you for all you're doing. I'm sure you're much more tired than you're looking. So thank you for that. Just a quick question. You mentioned free school meal vouchers coming out from the government. Do you have any idea of when they might be rolling that out?
All we know is that we're expecting some details today from the Department for Education around all that. So I understand that they're reinvigorating that process. It's always been possible for schools to do their own thing. And they have. Yeah. So some schools have used all sorts of different creative systems for meeting that need. It was just, I think the particular challenge this time was that DfE encouraged the food parcels route, and as a result, some schools went down that route, perhaps whose families would have found vouchers much more easy. So I think there will be that shift over and that change over the coming weeks.
Grand. I see Kate's just popped a link in the chat box. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
And she's followed it up with another comment, I think, as well. Oh yes. Okay, so you might be able to look at that. So thank you very much. Who was next? It was Jackie.
Yeah, Hilary's covered the part that I wanted to say about the vouchers, etc. My only other point is with and maybe we could feed this in as well. Likewise, I think it was Mark that said it. Likewise, a young person that is showing advanced years as an adult can also be as a result of, and I'm sure they're well aware of it. But it isn't an easy. I don't know what the answers are. And I am incredibly pleased, and I regret not saying we should have added that in to our recommendation, actually, that it is, as a mental health worker, it is incredibly pleasing that the mental health professionals, the area health authority, all of those people are recognising that we do need to integrate children and adults in respect of this more so.
Yeah, there's an issue there around transition, isn't there? Because, you know, one of the arguments is if you move it to 25, you've still got a transition from one way of doing things to another. A lot of the conversation that you've just been party to was very much about looking at that whole piece differently, and being able to look at what would be most sensible for the individual. But aside from can't even speak now. Aside from that transition, we're also, I think, wanting to hold people in the children's services world up until 25, where that's humanly possible across different systems, because I think that just makes more sense.
And I think, Sally, you've just hit on partly one of the keys maybe to that process is, because I'm thinking in particular of young people that I've worked with that have been in the care system, that have also had mental health issues, that one day they're with one team and they are dreading the change. So I think maybe the key is just, and it might be that it's already being looked at, we have a team that is a mixture of both workers for young people and adults. So as that transition period is managed more effectively and over a period of time, rather than you're not a child anymore, so next week this is your new worker. Because quite often for people with mental health issues, for children that have been in care, their one positive relationship is that worker that has been with them maybe for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is something there, I think.
Yeah, and parents of disabled children would feel that keenly too.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that, Jackie, and thank you, Sally. Debbie has just reminded me that the short development session we're going to have after the break is on the COVID winter grant scheme. So issues to do with hunger and food will be covered in that. So I hope that we'll find that you'll find it worthwhile. I didn't know much about it until yesterday, so I'm really grateful that we're going to have a briefing on that. Thank you. Next, it's Julian.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you. Some of my questions have been answered really, but I do want to say and use this opportunity to offer my sincere thanks to Sally, particularly for the horrendous burden of work that she must be under with Together for Families, where she's been our champion at Cabinet, no doubt, and also public health. Either of those would be a massive challenge for anybody. To have both is incredible. I want to thank Jackie. I mean, listening to her today, all the things that she's so committed to. But I also want to thank my colleagues around this committee, because I think, as we come to the end of our session in this council, I think we've pulled together. I enjoy the fact that apart from one little coup, I won't mention, but I have, it's been pretty non-political, and it's all been about all of us sharing a passion of care for our young people. And then finally, just to thank the amazing officers, who have pulled this directorate together and achieved amazing things. Whatever we do beyond here, let's fight to keep the standards up and improve as much as we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julian. I don't think there's a question there.
No, thank you. Okay, and I don't have any more crosses in the box. So we're coming just to the end of the session. And I will say at this point, Julian, both you and Simon have been a pleasure to work with. Thank you both. And also to echo the thanks to Sally and the incredible task that she's undertaken. So nothing to vote on there. So it leaves me just with any other business, and I just have a very a quick thing to say, but to me it is absolutely enormous. You will remember that when we had the development information period on from Lisa Harvey, which covered a lot of issues to do with One Vision, and I was fairly exercised by the fact that the design of it, the One Vision board, the overarching one, didn't contain an elected member, and Lisa did say she would take that back. And I understand now that though Sally may not have wanted the extra work, but as a Democrat, and because of the amazing work that this committee has done over 2 years on integration and One Vision, I felt it was important. And I just want to say thank you to Meredith for taking my comments on board. I am, there will be now an elected member, and I am very, very grateful because I felt passionately, and I think your response to what I said, I think other members felt that that was an important part, because without that, it sends the wrong message out there. And we've always worked supportively, challengingly, but we've always worked together with officers very well, and I didn't want to see that, what would be a perceived separation. So thank you, Meredith. I am enormously grateful. It was very important. Thank you. So we are, where's my timings gone? I found them again now. So we were due to finish at 1, and it is now 1:15, so we're 15 minutes over, which isn't too terrible considering the vitally important topics that we've had here this morning. So I'm going to formally close the meeting. I think that's right. I'm allowed to at this point, Debbie?
Yes, absolutely, Chairman.
Because it will be an informal one. So we were looking at a quarter of an hour. Yeah, we were looking at, I can't tell the time, 13:15, hang on. Oh yes, so we're actually on time. Yeah, we are.
Would you, once the live stream has stopped, if you'd like to maybe have a 15-minute break and return at 1:30 for the development session?
Would you rather do that than have the longer break that originally we were going to do? The session itself is how long? Remind me, Debbie. I can't.
About 45 minutes, Chairman.
45 minutes. So do you want to go start at half 1 and then go finish at 2:15, or take a lunch break now and come back?